Hello, testing. Just testing to see that the microphones are working and being recorded by the IT team. Young Gary, can you confirm this is coming through?
Good morning, everybody. If I could ask members to have your attention now, please. Thank you. First of all, a welcome to members who are here on the Planning Committee. Thank you for your attendance. We've got one on the way, just about to arrive, I think, which brings us up to 11 this morning. I think we've had apologies, but we'll come to those later on. Also, welcome to officers who are sitting on the left, and to members of the public who are sitting in the public gallery. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. But when you look at the weather outside, what else would you do this morning other than sit in a planning committee meeting and listen to us? So, there we are. Thanks for your attendance. Can I just remind everybody the usual protocol in terms of microphones? Switch them on when you're using them, and try to remember to switch them off when you've finished saying what you want to say. In terms of procedural items, item 1, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Good morning, Councillor Ledger. There we are. We're only going through protocol, so you're fine for all the applications.
Chairman, for the record, item 2, which is the development at Peel Park. I used to work on that site some years ago. I have sought advice from legal. I don't need to declare an interest, but for the record, I'd just like it to be noted that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. That's clarified that. Confirmation of minutes for the meeting, I think, on the 21st of January 2026. All seen the minutes? Can we just have a vote, please? All those in favour? Passing the minutes as an accurate record? Thank you. Unanimous. Thank you very much. And substitute members, Catherine. I think we've got some this morning.
Yeah, good morning, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Farrington and Councillor Goodman, and Councillor Peter Collins is here on behalf of Councillor Goodman.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Collins, for stepping in. Before we move to item 4, decision items, just to explain to members of the public that we don't have any speakers this morning. We don't have any late observations. And so the planning officer will give a presentation regarding each application. We're starting with item 1. We'll work our way through in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 this morning, as it appears in the report. When the officers have completed their presentation, it will be open then for questions and debate from members. So I hope that's clear. And so, yes, Pete, yes, Councillor Collins.
I'd just like to make a comment on procedure. I think it's on page 4 of the agenda. We've got to be consistent in decisions and in interpretation of the rules. Now, we've had 2 applications for listed buildings, one at the last meeting, one about 6 months ago. And you've got to balance the harm against the benefit. Well, looking at them, the one last month, there was, to my mind, a significant benefit with very little harm. So, to my mind, you'd be leaning more towards approving it. Now, when we had the Derby Arms Trails, it was significant harm. Half the listed building was being demolished. But when you take a backward step and look at it, why was it being demolished? You've got a 60-space car park that was being built on to put...
Councillor Collins, I'm going to stop you now because I think it's fair to say that we have confidence in members' judgments. I think we have confidence that members know how to vote, how to make planning judgments, and I don't think it's appropriate for this to continue.
Okay, can I just make one final... Can I just...
Because you said what you said, we've heard.
I was closed down last time, I was closed down this time, we've got to be... Well, I was told...
You continually do this, and it isn't relevant. Thank you.
It is relevant.
Right. It isn't down on the agenda.
Yes, Chairman, I'm not sure what that actually Councillor Collins got to the point that I could respond to, other than perhaps discussing matters that have been considered by the committee. But I don't know what the query was, so I'm sorry I can't offer a more coherent response than that.
Anybody else like to make a comment?
Yeah, it's not on the agenda, and we've got to obviously seek each application as we see it. So it's a discussion you can have with me after here if you like, but it's not relevant for now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everyone. This application relates to a site called Cropper Lodge, which is up at Whitehills, off Cropper Road. So to familiarise members, obviously we've got the M55 junction here, Whitehills Industrial Estate, Lytham St Anne's Way, and the New Link Road coming down to the Cypress Point and Lytham. This is Cropper Road. So The land to the western side of Cropper Road is all allocated for residential development. The land to the east is obviously the subject of relatively recent residential development. This application relates to this parcel here and is an application for residential development of that site. So it's a rectangular area of site, currently has a single bungalow on with some grazing land to the rear. It's next door to a site called the Garden Place, which we've dealt with an application last year, granted planning permission for a neighbourhood centre and residential development. That scheme has now started, so the development's on site on that scheme. Today's application is for the erection of 45 dwellings on the site, and is here, it's major development, but also it's subject to an objection from the local parish council. The application is recommended for approval, subject to, well, the officer recommendation is to support it and delegate it to officers because there are one or two, the conditions need to be drafted and there are some other sort of final works to be done on it. So just to set the scene for where it is, this is some views of Cropper Road. So what you're looking at here are the recent developments on the other side of the road to the site. I've taken these pictures stood in the access point to the property. This is the property itself, so you see it's a bungalow, outbuildings, and then the site extends back towards roughly around where this hedge line is that you can see on that photograph there. So in an aerial view, that hopefully gives you a little bit more context to it. This is Cropper Road, School Lane, the bypass down the Lytham St Anne's Way down towards Lytham. This is where the Garden Place was and where the residential development is currently taking place. And obviously I've outlined the site in red. In terms of the policy position, the slide on the left indicates with the hatching the various current planning applications we have on that allocation. So that is the entire allocation, and we've got a number of different applications which I put in this box on the right hand side to give you an indication of the overall numbers that are currently being proposed under those schemes. So the bottom one is the one that's got planning permission, the Garden Place, and for 58 units. The top one is the one that we're considering now. The largest one is to both sides of this application site and is for a scheme of 350 dwellings. And then we've got a scheme for 60 dwellings over here and a scheme for 260 over here. So those are all applications that are with us, that are all progressing and will come to committee in due course, hopefully relatively quickly. Because obviously as an allocation and with the current 5-year supply situation, we're looking to do what we can to facilitate the development of these sites. So with this when this allocation was put forward, there was a master plan drawn together. This is the latest version of the master plan that shows the various house parcels, how they would knit together. You've got the neighbourhood centre taking place slightly in a different arrangement to this, but that's immediately to the side of it. And you can see that there is this concept of having residential development, a new road to link through and divert the existing Cropper Road, which is it's a restricted width and poor condition, and then the development around. You can see that there are areas of green in the centre. This is largely a consequence of a flood risk situation. The area, and this is a point that the parish council have raised, is that the area is at higher risk of flooding. So the developers have had to do some creative works in terms of engineering the site to avoid exacerbating flood risk elsewhere and to ensure that the properties that are developed are not at risk of flooding themselves. We've all seen on the TV in the recent weeks the situations that can crop up. So this is the scheme that's under consideration today. This is the site layout. It's a full application for 45 dwellings. So this is orientated different ways slightly. So this is Cropper Road to the right-hand side. Single point of access to serve almost all the dwellings, with a road that comes through, has a T junction at the end, a turning head at the end, but also has a connection into the land to the south. Yes, the south, which is part of one of the other applications, the Wayne Homes application. So that would be the subject of a condition that's provided, so that when, as and when Wayne Homes bring forward their scheme, there is that vehicle connection through into their site to assist with the connectivity of the developments within the allocation. This lighter brown is a pedestrian cycle link, so that's giving connectivity in both directions through that means. The grey elements are obviously the dwellings. Each has its own garden. Pink areas are the private parking areas. Up at the top of the site, there's an area of for dual use, so it's an area of open space, but it also has a balancing pond and a flood storage capacity element to it to deal with the flooding matters. So that's how this site has dealt with it, in that the properties are elevated above existing ground levels to lift them out of the flood risk areas, but there is compensatory storage provided within this part of the site that would provide surface water storage in times of rainfall. That then, you see the blue lines, that then discharges into various ditches and streams and is taken away. So there are a number of house types on the site. I've got some examples for this to show you. So there's a mixture of 1, 2, 3 and 4 bedroom properties. So this is one of the larger ones. This is one of the 4 bedroom properties, detached integral garage. They're all 2-storey. This is one of the smaller 2 bedroom properties, pair of semis, giving that mix of housing types that we need to see in developments of this sort of scale. And finally, we've got one block of 1 bedroom properties, which are done as kind of a quarter arrangement. So you've got living accommodation on the ground floor, sort of stairs that turn round, and then a single bedroom and bathroom at the first floor to provide that smallest level of accommodation. So in terms of the sort of considerations of the application, the site is allocated for residential development. This is a residential development scheme, so it's ticking the policy box in that respect, and is compliant with the local plan policy. Because of the housing allocation, the wider allocation, the scale of it, there's a policy requirement that there's a master plan presented. That has been done. I showed it on the slide earlier. This shows this scheme generally accords with that master plan. Whilst the master plan's not been formally adopted by the council, this scheme is fitting in with the master plan that's been put forward for the site, which is generally along the lines that we would want to see. One of the key elements of the master plan and the local plan allocation is to make sure that all the parcels connect to each other, so that each individual parcel within the allocation isn't in isolation. I referred to it when I talked about the landscape, the site layout plan. You've got connectivity through vehicles. You'll have connectivity through pedestrians and cycle routes. You've got facilities already in the area through the employment use. You've got facilities being developed in the area through the neighbourhood centre that's under construction. These are all going to be accessible either along Cropper Road through pedestrian footways, or from these pedestrian links within the site and vehicle links within the site. And those will be subject to planning conditions to ensure that those are provided. The access point, the vehicle access is off Cropper Road. So that's a new access point that's been formed to replace the existing driveway to the dwelling. LCC are generally happy with that. There are one or two sort of outstanding minor technical issues to do with curb positions and the like, but those are readily resolvable. So the access will be fine. There's clearly capacity on Cropper Road to accommodate for this this level of development, given the allocation of the land for residential development. That's obviously one of the things that we'll look at. Similarly, the design. At the moment, it's a greenfield site. The allocation of residential development in the local plan means that we must accept that it's going to be urbanised. This scheme obviously does that. Because of this linear shape to the site, there is perhaps limited options in terms of how the layout could be presented. But the scheme that is now with us is more interesting, more fluid, has better street scene arrangements through changes that have been brought into the design of properties, the use of landscaping to break up some of the parking areas, and those sort of general design areas have all been dealt with to our satisfaction and give a scheme that this is appropriate. From an ecological perspective, there's no particular ecological interest on the site at present. The application has been with us, you see from the agenda papers, the application's been with us for some time. There's been work on it recently to update the ecology surveys, and they've all confirmed that there are no protected species, habitat or anything like that within the site itself. There's also been work done as part of this site and the wider area to look at the potential impact on the higher level designations, the estuary, and the potential for these sites to be used by particularly the wintering birds that are obviously important to the estuary. Those survey works have come back and addressed what they need to address in terms of the lack of use of this site, or the limited use of this site, and the applicant has produced a habitats regulations assessment, which is the required element of that legislation, which demonstrates that, and part of the recommendation today is that is adopted. Final slide, the drainage elements, I've discussed those briefly earlier. It's been an issue with every application on this site. The site has changed in flood zones since the allocation, and that's why the developers have had some challenges in terms of dealing with the drainage. In this case, this is an extract from the flood risk documents that have been submitted back end of last year, back end of last year. So the site is actually on the flood risk maps within the higher flood risk areas. There's been some work to refine the detail. The applicants, hydrologists have looked at whether the flood maps are actually reflective of the flood position, and that's produced this plan which indicates that the situation isn't perhaps as stark as the Environment Agency's plans indicate. They've also set out some mitigations, which I've put on the bottom of the slide here, which is to do with raising the development platform by 600 mil, raising the floor levels above that development platform, and then create that flood storage area at the top end of the site, which compensates for the flooding situation. The Environment Agency have reviewed this and have reviewed this in some depth and are satisfied that there are no undue flood risks either on this site or being passed to surrounding lands as a consequence of this development. So what we're seeing here is, this is the text at the bottom, is the summary text from the Environment Agency, who say that they are satisfied that the development is safe without exacerbating flood risk elsewhere. And this is the sort of position that the flood risk works get to, where you see that the site where the dwellings, part of the site where the dwellings are, is free from flood risk. And whilst there is some flooding, it's in the area at the top of the site, which is set aside for that flood storage. Infrastructure, perhaps the final point to discuss, and is perhaps a concern with the scheme. As part of the balance, the master planning approach, there are a series of, or there have been a series of requests for financial contributions. So there's a contribution from the Highway Authority requested for providing a bus service to the site, for implementing a monitoring of a travel plan, and there have been a contribution request to enhance health GP provision in the area. Although there's no education request because there's capacity in local schools. This scheme doesn't provide any of those, and it also doesn't provide any affordable housing. So the scheme is entirely for market housing. The reason for that is that the developers have argued through a financial viability assessment that there isn't any financial capacity within the scheme for it to deliver those costs without it making the scheme so unviable that it would not be implemented. When we get such positions, we assess those financial viability assessments, and we use a firm of well-respected viability assessors to do that. They've looked at this, they've challenged the position that the developer put through, and there are some differences of opinion, but the overall conclusion is that the scheme would develop a loss if it was implemented as proposed, unless there is a significant rise in house prices in the time that the scheme was put forward. So in some ways that sort of hit that sort of head on. If the scheme's making a loss, why would somebody bring it forward? The position with that is that the financial assessment includes an element of profit. And I've discussed this with the applicant's agent, and they confirmed that because of the property portfolio that's held, they're looking to, or willing to accept, a lesser profit on this site to bring it forward. Obviously we're keen as the local planning authority to develop this site, as it's an allocation, so clearly it's not an ideal situation, but in the overall planning balance and the sort of the benefits of bringing forward or continuing to bring forward this allocation, we've accepted that this is a scheme that the committee should be recommended to support, notwithstanding the fact that it is entirely for market dwellings without making any financial contributions. So on that basis, Chairman, the officer recommendation is that as in the agenda papers, is that the scheme should be supported, and the decision to grant planning permission delegated to officers once the conditions have been drafted and the habitats regulation has been adopted, and those other matters.
Thank you, Andrew, for that presentation, and we'll move to members' questions or debate. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Good morning, Andrew. Thank you for the presentation. Just a few comments to start with. I think it's really important that we've got a master plan. We've touched on this before when there's been multiple different strands of an application on a site, that we're aiming for a harmonious collective at the end of it, that these 4 developments all sort of merge together and don't sort of butt up against each other. So it's encouraging that we're working to a master plan, and it's encouraging that we are looking at it as a whole, because obviously there are serious flooding concerns on that site. So the first point that I want to part with you, because I know I like to give you a couple of things to answer, is the the United Utilities have made reference to the point that obviously it's all right having these attenuation ponds and having some flood mitigation, but they're interested in making sure the conditions are there, that the management ongoing of those issues need to be put into a maintenance plan for the whole site. So I think, and I'd like a bit of information about that. And in terms of the affordable or accessible housing element, I'm a little bit concerned that you may well be setting a precedent there. I realise this is a smaller parcel of land in comparison to some of the larger ones on the site, and I think we also have recently passed the previous one that was all affordable housing, if my memory serves me right. But I'm a little bit concerned that we've waived this particular site's responsibility to meet that affordable housing, and in quota, and in particular, from my point of view, accessible housing or housing that's been slightly adapted. And I would gently suggest that having a couple of those properties that have slightly wider door frames and are mindful of the fact that people of varying needs may need to have housing in that particular area, I think it's something that we could push back on a little bit without saying that they have to be affordable for rent at a certain price. So I would like to see if we could dig into putting a condition there that a few of those houses were accessibility friendly, if that makes sense. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do you want to respond? Well, yes.
Yeah, can I kind of tackle those in reverse order, if that's okay, Chairman? The local plan has a policy that requires 20% of properties on a scheme of over 20 units to be to a certain accessibility and adaptable to that accessibility standard to deal with people who are wheelchair users and the like. Since that policy was brought in, there have been moves in the building regulations towards ensuring that properties are more flexible in that way anyway. So it may be, or it is, the position that the building regulations have in some way caught up with what we were trying to do through that local plan policy. So irrespective of how the this scheme perhaps doesn't meet the policy quota, the building regulations will require it to provide properties that do have those wider door frames and the like. But part of the recommendation is that the conditions are drafted, and I'm happy to take that matter further forward and consider with the applicant and with the building regs team. It's not an application I've personally dealt with, so I've not been involved in those discussions. But I'm certainly happy to move that forward, to propose that there is some recognition within a condition that a number of the units are of that nature, if the building regulations don't require that anyway.
I think, speaking personally, I would be very grateful if that was the case.
Yeah.
Because accessibility is obviously an important factor here in terms of providing housing within the community.
Yeah.
So if you could do that, I'm sure that would be welcome.
Yeah.
Do you want to come back to that before Andrew moves on?
No, I think that's welcome news. I'm happy for that to be explored. And also, the other reason I raised the point was because obviously you've highlighted the fact that they're going to raise the properties, and obviously that's the whole ground level, but my concern was the threshold of some of those houses. If that continues on and they have a high threshold, then it does make it very difficult for people to get in and out of those, either in a wheelchair or difficulty with mobility. So
yeah, the building regulations certainly ensure that there are level access points, so that won't be an issue for any of the properties. The second point raised was affordable housing. Yes, the scheme doesn't provide any, but yes, it is part of a wider allocation. If I go back to the slide there, there's best part of 800 houses. This scheme is 45, so 30% of that will be 15 or so. So there is a shortfall, but the scheme that's on site next door is entirely affordable housing. So if you took the two together, which, you know, obviously an argument you take or not, you're getting more than the 30% across the two sites together. So it's clearly, we can't give up affordable housing because it's a key planning delivery requirement. But where there are viability arguments demonstrated, and they've been obviously assessed, as I explained, and found to be a valid situation, we have to make some compromises to accept that the development is brought forward. And in this case, because of that sort of wider development and the adjoining land situation, that's a compromise that we've been able to accept.
Can I just ask there, Chair, if you'd indulge me? So am I to understand there that our aim is still for the whole site overall, that we are still aiming for 30% affordable housing across the piece? What I don't want to do is set a precedent there where when the other two applications come, they could reasonably make the same financial argument, which would squeeze our quota down. So, you know, obviously when you look at those two, one of them is totally and the other one has negligible amount. So yeah, we're still in front, but when we look at the whole parcel with the 4 units coming through, four sections coming through, we're still aiming for 30% across the board.
Andrew, do you want to?
Yes, we would. I mean, every development needs to be policy compliant. The policy is very clear that 30% should be provided. There are national legislation and policy options that allow for viability to be used viability to be considered in the planning balance to make sure that schemes do come forward. So we can't sort of prejudge what arguments might be presented on those schemes, but it is certainly officer position that we will be looking for all developments on this site and any site to deliver its policy obligation in terms of affordable housing delivery.
And I think to go back to a point you were making, Councillor Evans, is that viability obviously is an issue in this particular application, but if you look at the master plan, you're looking at the holistic delivery, and as long as 30% is achieved within that, it's solid policy compliant. Thank you. Councillor Settle.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Evans has made my main point about the economic viability assessment. I do find it rather sad that a builder who's building 73% of his houses as 3, 4 and 5 bedroom houses can't actually make enough money out of them. It's a rather sad state of affairs, that. It makes you wonder whether all the other applications we might be looking at, they'll come up with the same excuse, like the ones near Freckleton at the bypass there. Will they come up with the same comment? And the fact that a builder's relying on the fact that another builder is providing 30%, he can therefore provide 0%. It's the economics of madness, really. But I guess I can't do anything about that. If you've already been in touch with our valuers, etc., that's the case. But I'm disappointed that they can't at least make some contribution, come from whatever contribution they're expected to make down to 0. And the one I homed in on was the NHS one, the £38,000 towards GP surgeries. Can they not at least provide some contribution? You know, within 45 houses, making a £38,000 contribution seems viable to me, rather than go straight down to 0. But maybe you could just consider that. But just the last comment, well, last observation really, something that I've seen on all these applications, I never see a time scale for build, unless I'm missing it somewhere. Do they not give us time scale saying we'll build these within 2 years or whatever? And the reason I make that comment is that, as you said yourself earlier, Andrew, we're not meeting our 5-year housing supply. Not because we aren't approving applications, because we are. It's because the builders aren't meeting the builder expectations. They're just slowing down the build while they wait for house prices to go up. So in a normal contract in the real world, you'd say to the contractor, I want you to build these within 2 years, and if you don't, there's a financial penalty. There isn't such a thing at the moment in planning, so we just hope they will build them to meet our 5-year supply, and then we get the sort of punishment from the government if we don't meet it. That's just an observation which we seem to be stuck with at the moment. Thank you.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, taking that last point first, again, you're right. There isn't any way that we can require that to happen. Obviously, I mentioned the Garden Place application next door. That was granted planning permission middle of last year. Work started January this year. So there is development taking place. That developer has felt they have the confidence in that area to go forward with the development. But it is a national issue that people get planning permission and don't necessarily implement them. And various governments over time have looked at ways of trying to encourage that, but there isn't any mechanism currently in place that allows us to do it. Just coming back to the other points that you raised about affordable housing, the reason that there isn't any affordable housing here as part of this scheme isn't because there is affordable housing on the site next door. I want to make that clear. It's because this scheme has demonstrated that they can't viably provide it. And that is a policy opportunity that exists, that we have to look at the viability of a scheme with regards to provision of affordable housing and other infrastructure, and do that robustly through our retained valuers to make sure that we're not just accepting the words that are put forward by a particular applicant about their viability. When this scheme was first presented, 2021, there was an element of affordable housing in it. There was a couple of units proposed. As time has gone on, the application's been delayed, obviously 5 years, the best part, whilst the flood risk matters were being resolved. You'll see all the numbers on that box on the right-hand side are all at least 2, 3, 4 years old. There have been a lot of efforts made to resolve the flood risk challenges that this site carries, and that has brought forward costs to the developers, which has therefore impacted on their ability to deliver the health improvements, the affordable housing, the bus service diversion costs. And that is unfortunately the situation that we're in. The time it's taken to get to that solution has meant that build costs have increased. That's not been met by a rise in house prices, and that's reduced the viability of the developments and left us in the position that we're currently in. But the viability work that's been done is recent work. So, we are confident that is the correct position, and that's why we're bringing this report forward to you at this time.
And just to emphasise as well is that, we've had discussions about viability over the years, and they're very relevant, and we can see why sometimes there are concerns around this. But that's also why part of the process involves independent assessment of ensure that, and that's Kepi Massey that we use to ensure that these claims are credible and well-founded. It's not just a case that they claim and then that's it. There is a process, and it's not us that does it. It's an independent body, Kepi Massey, who will look at this very closely. And sometimes they judge they're not well-founded, and they will reject it, and that undercuts the very claim of not being viable. But in this case, it's difficult when the independent adjudicators here, Kepi Massey, have actually supported that viability case.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the explanation, Andrew. I accept the additional costs caused by the flood alleviation, etc. And I can't query then the technical assessment of it. just in summary, I am happy to vote for approval of the site. I have no problem with the actual site itself. It's surrounded by housing anyway, etc. And the layout looks okay. It was just this frustration with this economic viability. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Pittman, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate what Councillor Settle has said, and my question is basically an extension of that. Bearing in mind that this particular area of land is not going to contribute to transport and health, there is obviously a shortfall in the amount of money that is being provided. I take it this is going to be passed on, and the next, because how many more than 2 more applications for 2 more remaining areas to be developed? Is it 2 or 3? In this, yeah. Basically, this whole area is going to be in deficit, and I could well see that the next application will also cite the same problem. It's not viable because the costs of the infrastructure to raise these houses is going to be more expensive still. So, in a way, we are just passing the buck on to the other developments. That's as I see it. Am I wrong? But what happens in the end if the transport, the health cannot, and this social centre cannot be funded adequately? Do they just cut down? Who's picking up the bill?
Yeah, you mentioned social centre. The neighbourhood centre is actually being provided now. It's under construction. We've got an application in yesterday actually for a revision to the design, because I think we've got an operator lined up who wants an ATM in it and things like that. So that is going forward. The public transport contribution is the biggest sum. That was to be used, or it will be used by LCC to work with the bus services to either provide a diversion of an existing service or provide a new service. So what happens if they've worked out how much that costs, divvied up between the sites. If you get less money, you get a lesser service. So it may be that a service that ideally would be every 20 minutes during the day, every 20 minutes, 3 times an hour during the day, might only be 2 times an hour. So it's not that the cost is put elsewhere, it's more that the level of service provided and the benefit that it brings is lesser. Now it might be that when the site's all developed that it's the bus subsidy isn't required, and it's the sort of paying passengers cover the costs of the bus, and the service is then provided without that subsidy. But it's the funding's there to get the bus going and get the people who are on the site first using buses, because there's one there. Hopefully that's the way that will work out, and that won't be too, obviously it's not ideal, but it won't be too much of a detriment from this development.
So what you're saying is basically the services that are provided will be less than perfect because there's a reduction in the contribution. Does that mean that the next developments will, they won't shoulder any burden or an additional burden because this one is not viable?
I wouldn't expect so, no.
Right,
no, so the overall...
So they stand alone?
Yes.
Right. Thank you, thanks.
And to be fair, we have to judge this application on its merits, etc. But to be fair, also there's a contextual element that's been brought in here in terms of, no affordable housing here, but on the next site we've made reference to, so there is a case for looking at that in that sense.
And,
Thank you.
And also, if I may, just on that point, Chairman, amenities or lack thereof is a consideration for people buying houses, and that, of course, is ultimately, I guess, a risk that the developers take and chooses to take.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. My issue from the very beginning when I read the details of this application was affordable housing. You know, currently sat on a task and finish group to look at our affordable housing mix, and I still remain highly concerned that this applicant isn't providing any, doesn't fit with me at all. You know, there's a lot of demand for housing out there for people who currently can't afford it. You know, shared ownership. There's a big mix of affordable housing. Have we discussed the entire mix with this applicant, and have they looked into all the avenues and explored everything in order to provide a plan for this site? If you don't mind, Andrew, thank you.
Yeah, of course, Councillor Garland. Yeah, the sort of mix of dwellings has been changed since 2021 a number of times to try and find a scheme that works better financially, whilst reflecting the sort of policy requirements that we have to put smaller properties on. And that's being delivered here in that there are a number of 1 and 2 bedroom properties. So whilst they're not affordable properties by definition to the NPPF, they may well be more affordable than other properties elsewhere because of their size and potentially because of their location. It's one of the things that we would always look for. If a developer comes to us and says this scheme's not viable, right, well, you know, change your mix. You know, what can you do to make it viable? What can you do to do, you know, and we've gone through that exercise as we do with any developer who puts this argument to us. And this, unfortunately, it's the best case scenario, but it's not getting us over the line in terms of delivering affordable housing.
If I can give you some assurance that when I read the report, I had similar concerns that you've just expressed. So I was particularly sort of focusing and looking at the mix of housing that is being provided. And to be fair, there are 4 one-bedroom properties, which are very rare, and something that we've often discussed before. There's a local need, you know, for smaller housing. There are 8 two-bedroomed properties and 13 three-bedroom properties, which is, I think, 25 out of the 45 will be smaller housing. So in that sense, that's providing a need in terms of the mix. It doesn't address the affordability side, but it does give you a mix that of housing that perhaps we've identified in the past as needing in Fylde.
Yeah. Have they examined shared ownership opportunities? Because, you know, I know from talking to some younger people, that's an option of getting initially on that housing ladder because that financial barrier is just too high. I understand that there's a mix. Have they properly, do we think, examined the ability to go down that road?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I'm not the case officer on this application, so I've not been actively involved in all the discussions. But in terms of affordable housing provision, affordable rent is the where properties are owned by a housing association and then rented out to occupiers. That's the most demanded type of affordable housing, but is the most expensive for developers to deliver. So if you go away from that, you then go to shared ownership, you then go to discounted market sale, where there's properties are sold at 80% of their market value or around that. The case officer will have explored those options with them. So our policy would look for initially providing affordable rent. If affordable rent's not viable, we would then look at see whether shared ownership properties are available or are viable, we would look at whether discounted market sale properties are a viable opportunity. But the answer we've come back to is that there aren't any affordable tenures that are appropriate give adequate revenue to the developer to make the scheme viable.
Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. Most of it's sort of been covered really. This affordable housing thing, it does irk with you a little bit. When Cappy Massey did it, there was a statement of should house prices increase. When does that apply to? From when?
Yeah, their assessment concludes that the scheme at present isn't viable. If there was to be a sudden increase in house prices that wasn't matched by a sudden increase in build costs and the other costs that go with a developer, material costs, labour costs, all that kind of thing, then the scheme would become more viable. I mean, but that's, in some ways, that's an obvious situation, isn't it? If you're getting more money without having to spend as much to build it, you're going to make more profit, or it's going to be more viable. The position is that this scheme's, it's not that it's making a small profit, it's that it's making a loss. So the view that we've taken is that in the unlikely event that prices do rise more than costs, they would have to rise by a fair way to get anything near viable. So let's sort of move on from that discussion and grant the planning permission as is.
Right, okay. Do we ever get to see these reports from Cappy Massey? Do they ever get put into our thing?
We have them. I've reviewed it. So they are documents. They're not documents that are routinely included within committee reports. They're not included on the public website because they have commercially sensitive information about land values and build costs and things like that. But yeah, they are available to us and are reviewed by officers.
I'm just wondering if it would be slightly redacted, etc., but whether there would be a useful part of it to just explain how much of a loss these. It does seem a hard pill to swallow to say a developer is going to build all these houses but not make a profit. Of course he's going to make a profit. He wouldn't do it otherwise. It's just what level of profit is acceptable.
In a way, what we're saying is the present system relies on planning officers' judgment of the Cappy Massey report to look at that and accept that that is a fair report in terms of the way they've reported it.
The other question is, we've got, the figure was the 200 and something houses that are going to be built across the site. Is it of the application? Sorry, 779, which 30% of that is probably 233 thereabouts, is it? So are we confident?
I'm going to dispute your maths.
Yeah, are we confident that across this site we're going to get that amount of affordable houses? How many is in the actual garden centre one? How many does that come?
Well, that's 58.
58.
58 affordable units.
Yeah, so in theory, if you're going to lump it all together and use that 58 as a mitigating factor to this one, you put the whole lot together and in theory you should have 233 affordable houses across that site, the whole of the area. So we've yet to add those up to see that does work.
Yeah, the other
schemes 30% level.
Yeah, the other schemes haven't perhaps haven't come forward in their final form as yet.
Yeah.
So we can't do that calculation.
No, we can't do that calculation, but that's what we're
going
aiming for.
Well, more than that, because going back to the point that I made to Councillor Evans in response to his question, each scheme should be providing 30%.
Yeah.
So if one of the developers has provided 100%, we should be getting more than 30% as a whole. But that is subject to the potential for other viability arguments to be presented by the other development.
Do we still have somewhere in my mind? Affordable housing wasn't meant to be lumped together, was it? Not supposed to be spread out into various it's not supposed to be just one, like ghetto estate in effect.
Yeah,
So
I'm not
how's
sure
that
ghetto
gonna work
estate's
here?
the phrase that we'd use, Councillor
Sorry.
Nixon. But the idea of affordable housing is that it is pepper potted, is the phrase that we use. So that it would be, you might have 3 dwellings here, 3 dwellings there, rather than 33 dwellings there. That is the approach that we would take if we were getting 30% housing on site. So if this scheme, for example, were providing affordable housing, we might have these units, those units, and these units, rather than everything beyond this point's affordable. So that is how we would deal with it in terms of a design.
But next door we've got like a whole scheme of affordable housing, haven't we? It sort of goes against.
I'd certainly take the point that obviously you're getting a large number of units within that particular development, but delivery of affordable housing, as we've spoken about in the last sort of half an hour, is a key planning policy, a key council corporate policy. So we didn't want to not take the opportunity of that scheme, delivering affordable housing and delivering the neighbourhood centre.
Yeah, there's no way to mitigate any of it, is there really? It just is what it is. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ledger.
Thank you, Chair. I've only got a couple of questions about the affordable housing and some flooding, but first, maybe this is more of an overall question / observation, but we're, the last 2 years or however long it's been, we keep talking about an application on its own merits, which makes sense to me. I understand that's sort of the guidance we've got, but so often, and I think this right now is a good example, we keep talking about the context of the wider site or the immediate site below, and I'm struggling to find what I should be doing as a planning member, where I should be taking context and where I shouldn't, because by its very nature of taking the context or talking about the site next door, I feel like that is not taking this on its own merits. And I appreciate, it's not that I'm saying I don't want that information in the report, I'm just saying as a member, I want clearer guidance on what I should be considering and what I shouldn't. I'm finding it a bit confusing, personally.
Good point. I think perhaps something that may help Councillor Ledger is that the starting point is with a planning application that we are considering it based on the red line of the planning application. So in that case, that's the area we see on the screen here. But we are considering it, if I go the right way, we are considering it against the policies of the local plan. And in this case, that red line is within a larger allocation. The sort of the hatched area to the left-hand side of western side of Cropper Road is within a single allocation, and there is this master plan policy in the local plan that requires a collective approach to be taken to development within that strategic allocation. So whilst the position that you consider the scheme on its merits within its red line is the correct one, in this case, because of the scale of it, you need to perhaps, or we need to look at as a council, how it relates to its neighbours. So that's where the potential for wider public transport enhancements, the connectivity to the neighbouring sites, the dealing with the flood risk, so it's not creating flooding concerns to adjoining sites. All those matters have to be sort of taken into account as part of our decision on this particular application.
Okay, that makes sense. But in terms of affordable housing, then why is that something that we need to consider specifically in each scheme? Equally 30 across, when there is a master plan, and we might say we might have a slightly higher percentage here and a slightly lower percentage. That would also seems to be make more sense.
Yeah, if the developers had worked together, the landowners and the developers had worked together and presented a single application across the site, or there was a single master plan that was an adopted master plan. This is a draft master plan, so this shows how it could be. If this had that bit more weight in terms of it being adopted, being a supplementary planning document, something like that, we could then rely on that to be aware that one developer will provide all the affordable, one developer will provide all the open space, one developer will provide all the flood risk capacity. But that's not the case because the developers have come forward in some ways individually. So that's why we're having to look at each individual scheme as to whether that meets its obligations in terms of what the policy requires for, in your case, affordable housing.
And Councillor Ledger, the other thing, I hope this is helpful, is that this specific application is subject to a viability assessment. Now, that isn't always the case.
Yeah.
There isn't a need for a viability assessment, but there's two stages. One, you can claim a viability argument, the developers, but it then is tested by Kepi Massey, the independent, and therefore that viability assessment is a factor for this particular application, whereas it perhaps hasn't been in other applications. So that's another factor. You were talking about sort of weighing up all these things as a planning committee member. That's one of the things we have to juggle with as well. Okay.
Thank you, that's helpful. So I've got my substantive questions. On the Kepi Massey viability review, did I see you put up there that they said they were hoping to get 18% profit from this? Do we know what that is in absolute terms, in money, in cash?
Yes, we do, but I can't tell you what the answer is. Within the viability appraisals that's been presented, there are some. So the developer says it will cost us this much per square foot to build a house. Therefore, it comes to £15 million, and the sales will come to whatever. So there is a calculation of what the financial profit would be, and the sort of guidance looks at a 15 to 20% range for profit for a developer a housing developer. So 18% is obviously within that range. There's also then some sensitivity testing done. So looking at other scenarios in case, what if interest rates were to rise? What if by whatever? What if sales prices were to rise by 5%? And that obviously impacts on the financial sum that's available for profit. So it's not an exact science that there is. Yes, they are going to make £350,227 profit, because it is only an assessment and appraisal, and there will be inevitably some fluctuations in it as it's brought forward. The work that we get Kepi Massey to do is to assess how accurate that is in terms of a starting point, and how realistic any fluctuations that might come forward will be sufficient to sort of tip the balance into viability or beyond economic implementation. So that's their work, and that's where they've come to on this position, that they don't feel that it's not viable at the present. Sorry, they do feel that it's not viable at present, and it's unlikely to be viable with any of the sensitivity testing that's been done.
Okay, I think my question, my point, what I would find helpful in making a decision on whether we really should press for some affordable housing or not, depending on accepting this, is what is 18% or what is 15 to 20%, or a bit more detail on what Agapi Massio said, because if it, you know, if it is X number of million, or, you know, 2 million, whatever, or less than 1 million or whatever in profit, then that makes a bit more sense. But if a developer's saying, oh, I'm only going to make 2 million in profit, that's not worth it, then, well, I'm sure they could find something to do to stick to something close to 30% in terms of our local plan.
Yes, Chairman, I think perhaps the lesson I've taken from the discussion we've had this morning is that perhaps the report could set out a little more about the viability elements to perhaps give members more clarity on why this is being this decision is being made. I can't do that for this report, but I can certainly take that message away and see that it's done for future applications that,
well,
that raise this as an issue.
No, I fully appreciate that, Andrew. I think the point I'm making is I don't feel comfortable I don't feel like I have sufficient information to make a decision right now. Okay. I appreciate fully that this is a comprehensive report, and you know, absolutely trust your judgment. I'm just saying on this, I do feel like as a member, I'd like more information before I can make an informed decision on the affordable housing element. I do have one more question about flooding, but I don't know if you want to come back on that, or whether I can ask that flooding question. Yeah. So on the flooding, there's been a revision, and it's more favourable. It's more. It looks like we're in a better position, which is good. I'm thinking of some other sites in Files, notably near, you know, where in Westham and Kirkham. There are other factors there. I know that, you know, we as a council didn't necessarily recommend or even approve some of the sites that then went ahead because they went on appeal. But, you know, some of the residents there have had an incredibly tough time financially, emotional distress, health sickness, because the houses that that have been built have since been subject to quite considerable flooding, and they can't seem to get any recourse from the developers afterwards. And this is just a general question: what sort of insurance can people who buy houses on this site get if their property is flooded later, in terms of, you know, any sort of what insurance or compensation, or can they not get any at all?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer to the question is, I'm afraid, Councillor Ledger. The flooding situation is something that has been looked at, and the Environment Agency have probably commented half a dozen times on different proposals on this site and the adjoining sites. The latest position has been put forward by sorry for flicking around. The developers of this site have been working with hydrological engineers for the two sites either side of the same site. It's two parcels for one site. So they've been working collectively to demonstrate to the Environment Agency that raising the levels and doing these works on this particular site will work alongside the similar works that are taking place on the sites at either side, with the intention that you get to the position on that very last slide where the development platform, i.e. where the properties are built, is not at risk of flooding. I think I know the particular circumstance that you're referring to there in Westham, and I think that was down to perhaps an unfortunate combination of levels and the way that the developer put a pond in. Here, the pond is, or the surface water attenuation area is again, sorry for flicking around, is well separated from the site and will be at a considerably lower level than this road and this footpath. So the prospect of drainage coming back to the house is hopefully a very remote one, and that's why this effort's been put into sorting the drainage arrangements out prior to you know, any thought of bringing this back to committee for a decision, because we wanted to ensure that all that was adequately resolved. I know that doesn't answer your specific question, but hopefully it gives
helpful.
you a bit more context of the drainage arrangement.
Thank you. Lastly, for you, Chair, I mean, I made the point that I don't feel able to, I don't have sufficient information to take for vote today. I would prefer to see that information, because I think it would be very helpful. I think it's important. So, you know, I'd prefer if we could defer and look at this at another date, or at least get some clarification. I think that would be the right thing to do.
That's fine, thank you. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Just dealing with that point, if there was confidential information, could we not have a pre-meeting before the planning meeting for half an hour to go through that information when there's no members of the public here? It's just a suggestion. I'll leave that one with you. Looking at the scheme, when it first came forward, it was for 40 dwellings. That's gone up to 45. Just a point. In making a planning application, you pay so much per dwelling. So, has the planning fee been applied for the extra 5 dwellings that are on the site now? I'm just thinking we need all the money we can get for Kirk and Baths.
No, because the application fee is the fee that's due when the application is made.
Right.
So you don't ask for more fee.
For
so
more
if the,
houses.
for more houses,
Yeah,
equally
right.
you don't give a refund if the number of houses drops.
Yeah, when the original application came in, there was it was 40 houses, including 2 affordable. So that's 38 market housing and 2 affordable. Now I've listened. You know, I do have concerns about the provision of affordable, but looking at the site, there's a lot of road in that site, and I can see when they come down to do the viability test, perhaps why the numbers don't add up. We tend to think about smaller units being affordable units, but there is a big demand for market housing in this borough for 1 and 2 bedroomed market housing, and this scheme provides it, because the number of houses has gone up from 40 to 45, and to get the extra houses on, I suspect that this is where the 1 and 2 bedroomed houses have come in, and there is a big need for them. So although we're not getting the affordable housing, we're getting the 1 and 2 bedroomed units. I do share some of the other people's concerns about, yes, every site should provide for 30%, but if it can't always be that. So looking at it, I'm quite happy to propose approval of this application. I don't know if we've got a seconder.
We've got a seconder. Councillor Evans. So we've got a mover, we've got an approver. A seconder rather. Do we have any more comments from members or questions? No. Right. We're going to move to the vote. We're going to move to the vote. Should I also say that the part of the delegation to officers, if you remember, was to look at accessibility issues in terms of trying to blend in perhaps some provision there. Councillor Evans, you're happy with that, aren't you?
Yes, I'm happy with that. I think that makes sense, and I'm sure Andrew will work with the developers to ensure that's the case. And I think it will be helpful, because it's been a useful debate that we've had there. But the fact that there was an affordability issue on this site, and it went out to consultants, and they've come back and agreed with the applicant, sort of should allay some of the concerns that have been voiced today, that, you know, they have got that in their pocket, that they've had an agreement to the fact that there is a financial restraint on this site. So I don't see really how we could go against that.
Thank you, Chairman. Just don't want to delay matters particularly, but Councillor Evans did mention in his opening contribution about maintenance of drainage arrangements. That is something that is explicitly mentioned in the list of conditions on page 29 So it's something that we would be covering. It's like I say, it's something that the United Utilities picked up. So it will be done, and obviously I've mentioned previously about the accessibility point.
Shall I commence proceedings, Chair?
I'm just going to check whether
Everybody's here.
everybody's here. Yeah.
I've done the register.
Could we now begin with item 2, which you can find on page 30, and Rob Buffon, the officer, is going to present this particular application, which is up at Peel Park Centre, Brunel Way.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So, as Chair correctly says, next item is agenda item 2, which is planning reference number 24/0516, which is land adjacent to Peel Park Centre, Brunel Way in Whitehills. The application for consideration is an outline application seeking matters reserved to access and scale for a data centre facility with associated plant, equipment, substation, security office with primary access via Brunel Way and a secondary access through Peel Park. The application site is as per the very, very fine red line on left-hand image, which you might not be able to work out, but it is as per the red line image on the aerial photograph to the right-hand side. It's 9 hectares in size. It presently lies within the curtilage of the existing Department for Work and Pensions site. And just for a bit of context, this is junction 4 of the M55. We have commonly known as Big Tesco's just in Blackpool Borough to the north. We have the car dealerships of Volkswagen and Mercedes to the left and to the bottom of Yeadon Way. We also have B&Q to the south east of the application site. The site is located within the settlement boundary of Whitehills. It is also partly allocated as an employment allocation, which is identified by the purple image in the bottom right hand corner, as per the file local plan. So a little bit of background for those that aren't familiar with data centres. So that's what I possibly visualise a data centre to be. It's a building that's full of servers, and they're designed to store, manage and process data on a local, national and global scale. They're critically important to the operation of day-to-day business activities, such activities like banking, daily social media, email use, healthcare, education, with the demands for such continuing to grow, particularly through recent advents in AI technology. So the existing site, we have mature woodland planting along the M55 corridor to the north. We have mature planting to the east of the site in this location and along the south of the site. The existing access to the DWP offices is off this roundabout here, but there's also an emergency access route along the south of the south of the application site boundary, which is Brunel Way along this path here. It's overgrown scrub, and there is a car park to the east of the application site. And through discussions with the applicant in response to highway consultations, it's claimed by the applicant that that car parking has been constructed in advance of the delivery of additional office space at the site. That additional office space is shown in the right-hand corner image. So this wasn't an application which was determined by the planning authority due to the nature of the beast, shall I say, back in 1995. The council were just simply statutory consultees on that planning application. But what this plan does show is that there was additional and significant office development planned at the DWP site. So the existing building that we can see in the centre of the aerial image here is the black out image in the right hand side. So we can see from that plan there's going to be an additional wing to the east side of the existing building. There's going to be an expansion to the south of the building, but there's also going to be 2 separate office blocks to the south of the application site as well. And just one other point, there is quite a significant constraint on the application site, which is a high pressure gas main. And the approximate location of that gas main is the yellow line on the aerial drawing. So just a couple of photos to demonstrate appearance of the existing site. So there's no buildings or structures on there at all. It's scrub, trees, a couple of shrubs on there, but you can obviously pick up the mature tree belt in the right hand bottom image, and the left hand bottom images that envelope the site, certainly to the north eastern boundaries. So the surrounding area, just for information, the red line there that you see is the application site. So the locality is predominantly in employment use at the moment. We've obviously got the DWP offices to the west hand side of the application site, but we've also got existing employment units beyond the DWP site to the west. We've got an employment development that's under construction to the southwest, but also we've got White Hills, which occupies the south and the southeast quite extensively, as you can see on that plan. There are several pockets of existing housing. They're positioned on Old Houses Lane, as you can see by these brown circles, and the yellowed out land area that is subject to a resolution to be approved by this planning committee for 266 dwellings. That is still subject to the section 106 being signed. Again, that's just a flavour of the existing buildings that are on the White Hill site particularly, and DWP. So these are the larger buildings, so the DWP building and this NST building at the tallest points, they're 15 metres in height, and then that's just, say, a flavour of the housing accommodation which exists presently just to the south of the application site. So the proposals, the submission, obviously with it being an outline application relative just to access and scale, the actual submission itself is a lot more simplified than we would normally expect from a full plan application. So the details of the application relate to access and scale. The access strategy is as per that yellow line that you can see there. So the main access arrangement will be from the roundabout to the west that exists along Brunel Way, which is flanks the southern edge of the application site, and following the existing path of that road. So that existing path is identified by the yellow line on the aerial image. The only means of access in and out of that area of White Hills is along Jenny Lane, which in turn links to Progress Way. Progress Way is an extension of Squires Gate Lane that leads up to Morrison, so it's one of the main routes from the motorway corridor along Progress Way and into Blackpool. So obviously the site, with its proximity and road linkage to the M55, is extremely well located and accessible. Scale-wise, we're looking at the length, width and height of the buildings. Throughout the course of the application, the scheme has been revised quite significantly, in fairness, due to initial concerns with regards to the scale of height of the building that's proposed. So initially, the data centre building footprint is shown as green, and the entirety of that footprint was going to be up to 20 metres in height. There was also a multi-storey car park, which was going to be up to 15 metres in height, and then we had the substation access arrangement over to the west of the site, and that had its own separate access from Brunel Way. The revised proposals that sought to reduce the height of the data centre building queried the reason for the multi-storey car park within the scheme, and due to the location of the substation with proximity to houses to the south, queried whether or not the access to the site separated from Brunel Way and the main access arrangement was needed. So as a culmination of those concerns, the scale and height of the data centre building has been reduced. So the lighter pink, which you really can't work out on the rail, it's very light pink on my screen. So I'll start with the dark. So this darker pink here is a rooftop cooling system. So that will be to an overall height of 20 metres. But the lighter pink, which surrounds that darker colour, that is the main element of the data centre building, which is up to a height of 14 metres. The footprint of that building in its maximum measures 205 metres, so that's from this point here to this point here, by 129 metres, which is from this point to this point. The substation is obviously, it's been relocated, it's further away from these houses, it's positioned close to the existing, or the proposed data centre building. That's set within a compound which measures 80 metres by 30 metres, and that's to a maximum height of 8 metres. Again, by comparison, the secure building is much smaller. That is positioned to the main site access arrangement. Its overall height is 5 metres and measures 13 metres by 7 metres in footprint. Indicatively wise as well, the applicant, through dialogue with the Highway Authority, have been asked to demonstrate the amount of car parking that could be feasible on the site layout. So that demonstrates the layout could achieve up to 228 parking spaces. The applicant has also provided some indicative information that includes a landscape strategy. So if I flick back to the aerial image very quickly, might be back that one. So we can see from this aerial image there's a very strong band of trees to the north, to the east, and then along this boundary to the south. That landscape strategy, albeit indicative, shows retention of that existing woodland arrangement. It also shows new woodland planting to the south of the site where there isn't presently any woodland planting, and then general landscaping arrangements across the remainder of the site. From a drainage perspective, they've also indicated through their drainage strategy, and that included a flood risk and drainage strategy report, that they're going to be using attenuation ponds, which can be seen by the blue colour there, and swales, which will be positioned around the building perimeter following that course there. Just need to take a drink. So as I mentioned earlier, obviously with it being an outline application with relative to access and scale, the assessment and the parameters of the plan application are reduced. So our assessment is based primarily upon principle, access and scale, and the relevant issues to those matters. So in terms of principle, the application is partly an employment allocation with the end use data centre being compliant with the relevant policy of the local plan for that employment allocation. Not all of the site, though, is allocated for employment use. So you can see from that image in the right-hand corner that the car parking area is actually identified just as white land. But with it being within the settlement boundary, we have policies within the local plan which direct general development per se towards obviously development and settlement areas. Bearing in mind as well that the present character of that area is primarily employment. We also have job creation from the end use itself, and during construction we have determined that the principle of development is acceptable. The scale parameters, so we look at the scale parameters as part of character and appearance. We obviously need to make sure that the height of the building particularly sits comfortably with the heights of existing buildings which surround the site. the height of those buildings which are in situ at the moment, but obviously the ones that are being proposed. It's important that there's a strong landscape strategy which would help to reduce the visual impact of the development, and also act as softening screens, and Blackpool Council particularly were raised initial concerns for the visual presence of the building, particularly when approaching and leaving Blackpool on the main road that would serve into Blackpool. That obviously led to discussions with the developer about the scale of development and initial concerns for 20 metres across the whole of the building. That led to the reduced height for the data centre itself, albeit there is a smaller portion of the roof which occupies or will be occupying the cooling system for the data centre, will be to a height of 20 metres. In addition, there was a visual appraisal that was done by the applicant. That visual appraisal, it looked at main vantage points where the building could be seen from. So on approach along the M55 from the west, coming out of Blackpool from the east, from the north, and in those vantage points the building is quite well hidden, either by the height of the roundabout and the tree planting on top of that roundabout, or the peripheral woodland planting to the application site and to other employment sites in that area. But what it did highlight was that there are some clear vantage points from the south of the application site, primarily in this area here where we know that the new housing development is going to be built. Notwithstanding that though, I think in the context of this current site, views from the south will be seen in context with obviously the larger buildings on the DWP site, the larger buildings within the White Hills. So yes, the 20 metres, there is going to be some impact inevitably. The main body of the building is 40 metres, which is very, very consistent with the majority of employment buildings in the area. The 20 metre element, that is obviously going to be 4, maybe 5 metres greater in height than the larger buildings that are in the locality. But the setback nature, which we can see here, so the 20 metre element of the building is central, so it's set back from the building edges. That reduces the visual impact of the building itself. And I think in combination with the landscaping, which is going to be retained around, and the new planting that's proposed to the south, on balance, we can't report a significant harm to the character or appearance of the area. Highways wise, so Bruno Way, which runs along the south of the application site, as I said, that's going to serve as means of access for construction, and once operational, it has strong connectivity to Progress Way and then onto the M55. There's also a bus stop within the, or just on the edge, sorry, of the DWP site just here. So the site is very accessible, both in means of road networks, but also public transport and alternative means to get people who may be wanting to work at the site. The Highway Authority, through assessment, raised concern to the potential loss of the car parking arrangements here. There was a study undertaken which determined that with the amount of parking proposed, there could be a loss of up to 578 car parking spaces, which does seem quite significant. But bearing in mind the evolution of the site and how it was, this car park was brought forward in support of the delivery of additional office spaces, the applicant has provided parking assessments to consider whether existing car parking areas are overused, underused, and based upon that evidence base, the Highway Authority has no objection to the removal of those 578 parking spaces from the site. Residential amenity wise, obviously at this moment in time, we're not looking at the assessment between the layout and the building design to neighbouring properties. That relationship is determined or will be assessed through subsequent reserve matters applications. What we will be considering though at this stage is the impact of the access arrangements to neighbours. So any associated road noise, for example, that may be attributed to the access arrangements and impact to neighbours. So we have the access arrangement along the south here, we have neighbours here, we have potential new occupants of the housing site. So at the moment, yes, it's quite employment in nature surrounding, but the character of that area is going to change over time and it's going to become more mixed. It's certainly going to be more residential in nature than it is at the moment. The road speeds along Brunel Way are going to be slow. There's going to be high ambient noise levels in the area born from the employment area, but also from the M55. So based upon the high ambient noise levels, we don't consider there's going to be a high noise risk, certainly for those existing or new residents that might move into the area resulting from the access arrangements. About Protection have looked at the scheme and they have no concerns for that element. They do, however, require acoustic assessments obviously to be undertaken and to inform part of the reserve matters submission. So once the layout and the building design is known, we will then be looking to assess what noise implications the actual building itself, the use of the building itself, and the proximity of that building to those neighbours. In addition, we have had an objection with regards to electromagnetic field. That is relevant more to the substation. Again, we don't know precisely where that substation is going to go, so there's a condition advised for additional information to be submitted at the reserve matter stage to cover that matter, and then at that time we will be to determine precisely what, if any, impacts there would be from electromagnetic field. So on that, Chair, there are no other technical issues to prohibit the development and the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Rob. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Rob, again for an enlightening presentation. Thank you very much. You've covered a few of the issues, or a few of the points I wanted to raise right at the very end there. This is an important one for us because it's obviously providing jobs in an emerging industry and data centres. I think we touched on battery storage places before, so I'm definitely interested in the substation in terms of the emergency access for that. But could you just help me in terms of location-wise? In the aerial picture that you showed, I'm not great with street names, but I'm assuming that's near the sort of Bookers and the laundry site as well. That's classed as that industrial estate.
Let me just get an original aerial up for you. That's probably the best one.
Yeah, so they're on the left-hand side there.
Bookers is here. I don't know how best to describe.
That's fine, because I know exactly where we are now. Then. Right, so, because there are two warehouse buildings going up at the moment on at the side of the DWP.
There's a couple of. Again, this came through with the planning committee process in 2024, I think. So there's 3 industrial units being built on that light brown coloured land parcel in that location there. Phase 2 of that hasn't got planning consent as yet, but I am aware that the applicant is likely to bring that forward. So that green patch immediately to the east of that browny coloured area is likely to be built out for employment.
Because there is like a little access road that at the moment is not used apart from illegal fly tipping, but presumably that's going to then be built in from there, which will create access.
This roundabout you can just see to the west, that's to the end of Squiresgate Lane and Progress Way.
Yeah.
Obviously that shoots off in a northerly direction to the main junction that goes along Eden Way and then provides access to the M55. This area, though, of White Hills is accessed entirely off Jenny Lane, which is this roundabout arm running up to this roundabout here.
Yes.
So that roundabout then serves as access for these industrial units, Bookers, and then for DWP as well.
So where those new units are going up at the moment, on that sort of lighter patch of land there is a little sub-road there which is not finished. It's like a little...
I think I can only assume it's this sub-road here that you're referring to, then
Yeah.
that provides access to the United Utilities compound, so it's almost like just a service stub for this site here. There's like an underground reservoir, I think.
So, so the point I wanted to make was when the you've already touched on it, but when the substation positioning is finalised, that I think you said that originally they were going to have 2 access points, one for the main site and one nearer the substation, but by moving that didn't need to have a separate access point. So I think it's just important that we make sure that there are clear accessibility to the substation.
Yes. Yeah. So this was the initial submission. So you've got Brunel Way that runs along the south of the application site, which goes into the data centre area. There was also a secondary access point off Brunel Way which accessed the substation arrangement. In light of objections that we received from neighbours, and the fact that there is quite a lot of space available, I made a conscious decision that we wanted or should be looking to move the substation as far away from those neighbours as possible. So obviously by moving the substation over here, it logically made sense to ensure that access was just to the substation, the data centre was by a sole means, as opposed to having a separate access arrangement. That separate access arrangement, it could interfere with the woodland planting along here. Obviously then it would introduce breaks within that woodland planting and obviously open up visibility of the building should that occur. So it would be better certainly to remove that access arrangement to ensure primarily that the substation is relocated, but there's a good band of woodland planting to that southern boundary.
Okay, thank you for that. And you also touched on the fact that obviously the raised section of the roof is for a cooling section for the building, and that's going to generate some noise 24 hours a day. And that potentially we could do with monitoring that in terms of, is it going to be greater than the noise from the M55, or is it just going to be cumulative because the noise level from the motorway, the background noise, is sufficient that it would hide the additional noise? So that's an interesting point that we need to look at. And I suppose what I'm really saying is this could be the first of many data centres, so the conditions that we put on here are very important because they set the pretext then for any future applications that come forward.
I agree entirely. I think more so in this circumstance, bearing in mind that it's only an outline application. The report, and I did cover briefly in my presentation, that there is going to be a requirement for an acoustic assessment to be submitted at the reserve matters stage. So that is the appropriate time. We know exactly where the building is going to be sited. We know exactly where the substation will be sited. We know where the cooling system is going to be within the system, those kind of things. But that will obviously be informed by an ambient noise appraisal. So that will look at what the existing background levels of noise are. It'll look at the road noise from the M55. It'll pick up on all the potential employment noise from the existing uses surrounding the site. But obviously then we'll build into any potential noise source from the proposal as well. They'll put that into a calculation and it basically says whether there's going to be an issue for noise, and then that leads into mitigation. In this circumstance, assuming that the development comes forward, as we can see on that image, that will require some form of acoustic sound insulation to the cooling system. That will affect the design of the building, but clearly that can be dealt and built into the design of the building as well. So.
Just 2 final points, quickies. I think it's really important that you said there's a main gas main at one end of this site, so it's important, and it's good to see that the substation's at the opposite end of the site, and we could do with keeping those away from each other, which you know about anyway.
Just why would they be concerned there, Councillor Abbott?
Well, you know.
The orange line that you can see just to the east, that's basically the route of the gas main. Now, obviously, the siting of the building at the moment is only indicative, but we were conscious to make sure that this was on there for awareness to the applicant or any subsequent person or operator that might want to submit the reserve matters application. The operator of that pipeline, I think they would be willing to relocation of that pipeline, but that would be at significant expense. The usual solution is to abide by the easements which are associated to that pipeline. So there's a basic distance either side of the pipeline that you can't build buildings within, but there's a greater easement in terms of what we call a building proximity distance. So I think from memory in this circumstance, it's a 10-metre building proximity distance where there can't be any buildings at all within that either side of the pipeline. What you can do though, as we can see as evidence from the existing layout, you can build certain things over pipelines. So the car park arrangements, for example, at the moment is over the pipeline. So you can do certain things, but obviously the pipeline operator will want to know precisely what's being built over and how that's going to be constructed.
Thank you very much, Rob. And finally, thank you for Chair. Because data centres are so demanding of energy supplies, is it possible that we could, in the discussions with them, look at any solar availability to put around the building or on top of the building that would mitigate some of their high usages of energy? And that's me finished. Thank you.
It was something I can certainly have a discussion with the applicant about. What I will advise, as you've probably heard me say before, we have to look at the scheme that's in front of us. Blackpool Council, in their submissions to the application, they queried the energy demands of the development itself. Obviously, it does draw and require a significant amount of electricity to operate these kinds of establishments. So they were keen to ensure that electricity demand wouldn't stymie other developments in the area. And through my dialogue with Electricity North West, it's almost like a chicken and egg situation. If there's an electricity demand, there's an application that's made. Electricity North West will either grant that and provide, or will have to put additional infrastructure in to provide for that development to have the electricity that is required to run. So there is a kind of commitment from Electricity North West in that guise that if approved, this development will have electricity, and equally other developments in the area will have electricity as well. As an add-on, I suppose in this respect it could be some kind of renewable. We've discussed with the applicant the actual use of the heat that's generated in what we call district heating systems. Again, a chicken and egg. So the heat from the heating system here would be taken out of the building and used to heat all the houses, businesses in the area. But obviously to do that, you have to have the infrastructure. There's no infrastructure in place at the moment, unfortunately. We are aware that Blackpool Council are progressing certain elements. They're not very far down the line as yet. But there is a commitment from the applicant to look at the feasibility, at least, of making use of the heat at the reserve matters stage. So there is a condition in the papers as well to provide a feasibility about tapping into district heating when we consider the next application in support of the outline.
Thank you, Rob. I think that's really helpful and forward thinking of the best kind, especially when you're talking about housing and mixed use and housing coming into that area. You know, we were talking before about affordable housing, that if we could tie that in so that it reduces the energy cost of those properties, that's got to be a good thing. And
so there's certainly opportunity. We've obviously got the 266 houses to the south. We are seeing more employment units being built, so they would certainly benefit from the surplus heat in terms of their heating arrangements. But again, it's having the infrastructure in place to facilitate that, even just the pipe work from this development to the district heating system and then back out again to the different businesses that could use it. So it's in the making, but it's distant, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I bring in Councillor Griffiths, just a point to members really in terms of questions that you're anticipating or thinking about asking. And I know this is difficult to do, but please bear in mind this is an outline planning permission that is really concerning access and scale, and that there will be also another stage potentially of reserved matters which would also come back to committee. So there are going to be some questions which I'm sure the officers will feel regardless of that, but there might be some questions that are pertinent to the reserved matters stage, more of the detail. This is about access and scale, so if we can try to sort of concentrate on that, that would be helpful. Yes, of course, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a little context on one of Councillor Evans' comments about the proliferation of data centres, and you're quite right, that is the way things are going. But I think in terms of an application like this, the DWP is one of the largest IT users in the country, if not in Europe. A generation ago, they had 4 large data centres, one at Norcross, the north side of Blackpool, you'll remember, similar one in Swindon, others in Washington, Tyne Wear and Livingston in Scotland. The way computing power goes and expands, we're not going to see applications for data centres of this size month in, month out. This is an exceptional application, I would say, in that respect.
Okay,
thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just pick up, obviously, the outline matters that we're discussing today are access and scale. Those that are going to be reserved for future application or applications at reserved matter stage will be appearance, landscaping and layout.
Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Councillor Evans has covered most of my questions. Substation, electricity. So they're not going to put any renewable energy to help their electric usage, then?
No, there's nothing in
Nothing
the scheme.
on it at all. And what about the water usage?
Sorry?
Water usage. They need a lot of water to
They
cooling.
will require-
I've heard in other countries they're having issues now with the water.
They will require water. Just to go back, Andrew's whispering in my ear, there isn't solar in the scheme at the moment, but that's not to say that it could be incorporated at a later date. Water-wise, again, it's down to availability. Now, they'll have to speak to United Utilities in terms of whether there's a sufficient. If there's not, can United Utilities provide more to accommodate the needs of the development? Obviously, if it can't accommodate the needs, then the development won't come forward because it is obviously reliant on that water. Right. So the applicant will have to have sufficient comfort before actually progressing the scheme too far that there is that availability. Otherwise, obviously, it would be significant risk for them to progress and not be able to use the centre at all.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Settle.
Thank you, Chairman. My personal view is this is an ideal application. As you said, the access to me is perfect. The building fits in perfectly with the surrounding DWP buildings, etc. Very close to the M55. Industry want to attract here. To my mind, what's not to like? I almost go so far as to say I'm excited by it. To get a data centre here and Silicon Sands, the subsea fibre optic cable across the Atlantic, etc. It's going to be a hub of AI, etc. So it is absolutely perfect. I'm happy to propose acceptance.
Park that for the moment, okay. And Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. Do we have any details of approximately how many numbers of employees there will be?
Yes, I think it's in the
Right, sorry, I couldn't see it, that's all. I need some better glasses. I
think it also mentions 600 to 800 jobs in the construction.
Yeah, that won't necessarily be people on site.
No,
it's
no.
Obviously
that's the
extended,
chain.
Exactly.
The chain.
And the car parking area, is it being used at the moment for anything? Or is it?
If you, looking at this aerial image, so the main parking areas for DWP to the west. There's another car parking area immediately north of this building. Then obviously we have this car parking arrangement here. The main parking area is certainly here to the west and to the north. This area is used, but it's certainly not used
'Cause it's all
to
lit
its
up.
full potential.
Yeah,
It's more
it's
of an
lit up every
overflow.
night.
But equally, there's certainly spaces within these areas
Yeah.
or the existing parking
I've no
areas.
doubt whatsoever there's enough car parking space at all. I say it's because I drive past it regularly and it is lit up every single night, even though there's no cars on it, and I often wonder why is it lit up.
Yeah.
But that's not a problem. The noise element of these cooling fans, do we know? Have we got any information about it? I know is it something that's going to be monitored, like you said, later on? I know because we're looking at a 6 metre high cooling unit, aren't we?
Potentially, that's obviously what we're, in terms of scale at the moment, we're looking at parameters really. So it's a maximum height. It's not
Yeah.
an absolute height. It could be lower than that. It can't be higher than that, but it could be lower than that. The applicant did submit an acoustic assessment, but obviously because of the lack of detail in the submission, it can't go very far. Environment Protection, they were happy with the information that was provided within the acoustic assessment to date, but they want the detail in another acoustic assessment once we know where the building's going to be positioned, the substation's going to be positioned, and what that building's going to be looking like, because obviously the appearance of the building could affect its acoustic properties. But until we are considering those matters at a later reserved matter stage, then it's impossible for the applicant to provide that detail. But equally, it's essential that they provide that information when they can provide
Will
that
we
information.
be privy to that information once it comes back to that? That'll come back in a full application, yeah.
Well, reserved matters application.
Right, okay.
But
Right, okay.
the outline and the reserved matters, they're read together as one planning permission. So you have an outline, but you can't do anything, you can't construct anything until you have the reserved matters. And both decision notices are read as one. So a condition on the outline and a condition on the reserved matters, both equally as appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. It's probably me on this one. I'm a little bit confused about housing, location, proximity on this. Yes, in terms of exactly how close any housing proposed or current is to this site. I wonder if you could just go in through that in more detail, Rob,
You're talking
please.
about separation distances.
I
that
am,
sort of
yeah,
thing.
and
Okay, so that's the application site by red line.
yeah,
Now, if I just drop down to that layout arrangement, so you can see the building and substation, this point here, so the corner of the substation is approximately where that red cursor is. Can you see that red cursor in this corner here?
oh right,
Sorry,
that
just
one,
on
yeah, sorry.
So the building is approximately in that location.
Yeah,
The nearest housing arrangement is in this site here, which is where the new houses as part of this development are going to be constructed.
yeah,
The nearest existing houses are a group here. There's a pair of semis here, and then there's another pair of semis here.
so in terms of, sorry Rob, in terms of current,
In
what's
current-
the nearest
so current
industrial building to those?
Yeah, current houses are positioned here. There's a pair of semi-detached dwellings there.
Yeah,
There's a pair of semi-detached dwellings there.
yeah,
And then there's a farm group here. So there's 3 houses in there, I believe. Now, the separation distance from this point to this point, it's in the committee report, I think it's about 70 metres. Let me just... Where are we? I can't Find the section in the report. There we go. Yeah, so if you turn to page 61, paragraph 3. So whilst we're not considering the relationship of the building to neighbours at the moment because they haven't applied for layout. That means the location of that building that we see at the moment isn't fixed. It can move at the reserve matter stage when they apply for layout. All we're approving at the moment in time is basically what we call the quantum of development. So how big a building is in terms of length, in terms of width, in terms of height. But when it comes forward at the layout stage, in theory, it could be over this area of the site, in theory. But what we need to protect ourselves from a noise perspective at least, is that when that application for layout comes forward, we have the mechanism to be able to assess the noise implications. And at that time, when we're assessing layout, we're also assessing the relationship of the building to houses. So how close the building is to houses. But what I've done for the purposes of the committee report, I've looked at the indicative relationship, so the separation distances between existing houses, between the houses that are going to be built as part of the new scheme, and determined that if the layout came forward as suggested here, it would have an acceptable relationship.
Okay, thank you.
Is that all right? Does that answer?
Yeah.
I can appreciate it because of the nature of the outline of reserve matters. What we're considering, it is quite confusing. It is perhaps not the standard type of plan application that we're looking at today.
Okay, thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Councillor Carpenter. Are there any other questions or comments, observations, points anybody wants to make? No. It has been moved by Councillor Settle. Is there Councillor Evans is already indicating he got in first, Councillor Pittman, I'm afraid. So you've moved, and I just want to mention this was officer recommendation was grant to subject to BNG.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we've had it moved and we've had it seconded. All those in favour, please indicate. Okay, unanimous. Thank you. That's approved. Thank you, Rob, for that. We move on now swiftly to item 3, which is on page 85 of your report. And we go out to Little Eccleston here, Cartford Lane, existing caravan park and change of use, etc. So item 3, page 85. I think, Andrew, are you doing this one? Yes.
Okay, thank you, committee. Back to me. This application is at Little Eccleston. Relates to a site called Hurstleigh Caravan Site. So, Fleetwood Road, Windy Harbour Lights, Garstang Road off to Singleton and Poulton, Garstang Road off to Garstang. Little Eccleston to the north, Great Eccleston within Wyreborough to the south, more of which later. So this site is a rectangular area of land. It's on the edge of the village, close to the Cartford Inn. The site's very much in two parts. Part of it is an existing historic caravan site with a series of static bands on it, and part of it is a greenfield site that's next to it. The whole of the site is countryside in the local plan. So the proposal is to rearrange the accommodation on the existing caravan site and extend it into this adjacent greenfield site. What this does is it increases the number of vans on the site from 30 to 42, with all these vans, caravan units, being for holiday use and typical static size. The application's here at committee, because of an objection from the local parish council, which goes into some detail with their concerns over the, principally about the level of caravan development that there is in the village and around the village, and the implications of that on highway movements. So, having set that out, this is the existing situation on the left-hand side. So, the plan's a little bit vague and fuzzy, but the application site is, this is the existing Hurstleigh site here. So a single point of access, single route, caravans taken from it. And then this is the greenfield part of the site next to it at the moment. So the proposed layout is to use the existing access point and then put a series of caravan units off an internal road network like that, which very much reflects this site, which is to the north. The river's here, so this is next to the river. So this is a site called Mead Foot, which is a site that was in a very similar arrangement to the current Hurstleigh site until the current applicant purchased it about 5 years ago and has refurbished it into a more modern arrangement. So putting that onto an aerial, perhaps I could have shown this slide first. Putting that into an aerial context, you've got the greenfield site and you've got the slightly higgledy-piggledy arrangement of units on the existing Hurstleigh site, and then the more regimented arrangement on the Mead Foot site that has been redeveloped in the way that's proposed on this application previously by the existing applicant. What you can also see from this image is the extent of caravan accommodation that there is in that part of Little Eccleston. We've got another site here, we've got a site here, and then there's this large Merlewood site here, and there are a couple of units associated with the Cartford Inn as well. So there is quite a bit of caravan accommodation in that area. This is a wider view, so you can certainly see that context with Garstang Road here, the main village of Little Eccleston, and then this sort of caravan part as the road drops down to the river. These are some images of the site. So this is looking across the top image is looking across kind of like that, looking across the greenfield part of the site. So you're looking at the existing units on the Hurstleigh site. This is the road, Cartford Lane, as you get to the site access. So this is the site access here. And the site access is about here on this image as you looking down the hill towards the pub and the toll bridge over to Wyre and Pilling and all the stuff in that direction. Gone back, not forward. So this is how the sites look. So one on the left is the existing Hurstleigh site. So you can see it's sort of an organic higgledy-piggledy arrangement of units that have developed over time. Site's been a caravan site since the 60s. The site on the right is the Mead Foot site, which has been redeveloped about 5 or 6 years ago. You can see there's a lot more consistency in terms of the arrangement. The units are modern units. They're all of the same size. And perhaps one key point is that they're all provided with parking spaces. One of the issues that the parish council raised concern with is that there is a lack of parking within the existing site, and that's pushing cars to park on Cartford Lane, and that's restricting visibility for people who live in the houses on Cartford Lane and general users of Cartford Lane due to the width implications that this parking has. You see there's double yellows down one side, so the parking is all concentrated on the western side. So with this mead foot arrangement, there's 2 spaces for each unit. If I go back to the site plan, that's what's proposed under this application here. So the lighter beige, that's the caravan unit, and that's 2 parking spaces that are provided for it, and you'll see that that's repeated throughout the layout. Going beyond the parking, looking at the access, the bottom picture is the situation as it was 5-6 years ago. So this driveway served the Meadfoot site. This driveway served the Hurst-Lee site with this timber fence in between. As part of the redevelopment of the Meadfoot site, because the land was in the same ownership, a single access point has been formed, which is obviously much more appropriate for getting vehicles in and out. It's much wider. It allows much better visibility to be available. I don't necessarily know how you'd come out of here and look right and see up the hill, but that's obviously available now from this access point. So that's definitely an improvement from that previous permission that will allow for a safe, convenient, suitable access to the redeveloped site. So, one slide of considerations on this one. Sites in the countryside, GD4 applies, restrictive of new development. However, one of the elements, or a couple of elements of GD4 are supportive of tourism development. One element refers to small-scale tourism being supported, and another allows for existing businesses to expand. We've also got policy support in EC7, which relates to enhancing rural tourism. So, looking at the compliance with those policies, I can't accept that the number of units, 42 units, and the extent of the site is a small-scale tourism use. It does allow the existing business to expand, but it isn't a small-scale use. But I do feel that it's acceptable here because the actual level of increase in activity is relatively modest. We're looking at going from 30 to 42. So again, arguably whether that is small scale in number as an increase. If we look at the changes to the Meadfoot site, which again part of the same ownership, that's been recently redeveloped, and that redevelopment included a drop in numbers. So if you take the two together, perhaps the same concept we had with the first application, you're looking at 7 more. I've put in the slide, but I think it might be 5, mightn't it, in the report? Yeah, apologies for that. So there is a relatively modest increase in activity, a modest increase in the overall number of units. The access arrangements are acceptable. I've shown that visually here. The other key point, I think, is the landscaping pact. If you go back to the aerial image, perhaps this aerial, that aerial image, the site, the greenfield extension to the site is very contained. You've got residential properties here. You've obviously got the existing caravan site to the north. You've got another caravan site to the left, to the south, sorry. And whilst there is a small gap between the two, you don't see that area from any public vantage point on Cartford Lane. There is a public right-of-way that comes along the river bank and comes up and comes round here and joins back up to Garstang Road. It is possible that you will get views across there, about 130 metres away, but you've got a topography, there's a rise in levels. You've also got hedge lines, there's a hedge line here. So the actual visual impact of this, it's not as if it's a new site over here or an incursion somewhere else into obvious countryside. It is very constrained. And if we look back at what GD4 looks to deliver, it's reflecting the needs to develop the countryside whilst respecting its rural character. I'm struggling to see there's any particular harm to the rural character of the countryside from the infilling of this greenfield site. So, going back to my considerations slide, I do feel there's a real negligible landscape impact due to that constrained nature of the site. I think the final benefit that comes from this scheme is that the existing accommodation is haphazard. It's all very dated, the controls that it runs under. So this scheme will allow for new units, but it will also allow modern planning controls over them being used for holiday purposes, in the same way that is applied to Meadfoot and to other planning applications that we've granted for holiday sites across the borough. So, officer recommendation is that appreciate the concerns of the parish council over extending the existing caravan accommodation in the village, but feel that visually, with the scale proposed and with the access improvements, that the principle is acceptable. Looked at the neighbour relationships. The nearest neighbour is 20 metres away, with fencing and hedges between, so that there's no sort of harmful impact on that neighbour who's got it's actually from the kitchen window on the side of the property that they would see it. They wouldn't see it from the main front or rear elevations. There will need to be the normal ecological enhancements, so biodiversity net gain improvements and landscaping schemes, bird and bat habitat improvements, that kind of thing, will need to be implemented. So as a summary, the officer recommendation is to delegate the application back to officers, because there is an outstanding matter relating to drainage. This isn't a particular concern, but it's just that United Utilities highlighted that there is a sewer that comes across the site edge. Go back to the aerial again, that one. It comes down here, and they've requested confirmation that a bit like Rob's application previously, that the development is outside the easement for that, which it is, but I'm still awaiting for United Utilities to confirm that. They've also requested details of the drainage arrangements and how that would work. That's been provided in this plan, which confirms how the drainage is all taken away down to a holding tank and then released into the sewer. And I'm still awaiting United Utilities confirmation that that's an appropriate method. But subject to those matters being dealt with, which I'm fully expecting they will be adequate, planning permission should be granted in line with the conditions on the agenda papers. And there's a couple of markers in there just to fine-tune the drainage works when those matters have been you have come back to us on those matters. So that's your lot on that one, Jim.
Thank you, Andrew, for that presentation. Go straight to Councillor Evans.
That's a hat-trick from me. Thank you very much, Andrew. I can understand and sympathise with the local residents in terms of the number of caravans, parks or sites that are already in that area. But in reality, this is, because there's one on either side of it, it's infill realistically. My only concern would be that it looks like it's doubling the size of the site for only a 25% there or thereabouts increase in number of units. So the drawings would indicate that it's a tidying up of the site, like you've indicated, which has got to be a good thing. It brings it in line with all the ones that are surrounding it. But am I right in thinking that all of the land that's up here is going to be utilised with those 12 extra units? We're not going to be in a situation where we're going to come back again and say, well, actually, we'd like to put 24 units on it, because it seems to be a big parcel of land, so only increase by 25%. That's my only point, really. But apart from that, I'm happy to support it. I think it tidies the area up.
Yeah, this site layout on the right-hand side shows the obviously the whole site is filled with those 42 units. The reason that you get that you require that amount of land to provide a relatively modest increase, is that the existing arrangement is perhaps not to standard. The units are too small, sorry, too close together. They don't have appropriate parking. There isn't the same level of landscaping that we would want to see in a site of this nature. So when this has been designed to suit sort of modern caravan site layouts, you get a less intensive layout. Therefore, it's not just the additional 12 that go on the green field, it's some of the existing 30 units that are sort of compressed into a much smaller site, spread out into part of that site. So the existing site boundary runs, you see how that runs along that line, so it runs down here. So there's kind of half the units from that run are pushed out into the new field, and then you've got these 2 extra rows. So that's what leads to that land take. You've also got a separation that needs to be provided here for this for the water sewer easement. There are those little bits of constraints that mean that you know, that's the number of units that fit on that site.
Thank you. Councillor Pittman.
Thank you, Chair. This, I don't think, is a particularly controversial application. I do think the caravans are basically what you expect. This has been going on for some time, and yes, they're making better use of the land and tidying it up. I do wonder at the parish council, thinking it's such a bad thing. It's better than having a great housing estate there, but what it will do, and I think will benefit Little Eccleston, is removing some of these cars off Cartford Lane. It is difficult, particularly when you've got other visitors coming, to get down that road. There are huge problems, particularly when you've got lorries, parked, deliveries, etc. So basically, getting cars off the road onto this caravan site would be beneficial. So I have no problem at all with this application, and I'd be the first to recommend approval of it.
Okay, well, we note that. You're recommending approval. Was Councillor Evans going to second that? But we'll go to Councillor Dixon now.
Well, thanks, Chair. Councillor Pittman's just said exactly what I was going to say. This clearly tidies up the site. It removes traffic from the road. You say it's not a major. It is major. It's not really. It's 12 more caravans, but just laid out far more sympathetically for the users and to get the roads on there. So I'm very happy to support this application. And I will just say, Chair, I noticed one of the neighbours that says there's no leisure facilities or anything around. Just to say, Over the Road is perhaps one of the best pubs in Fylde and restaurants, which is absolutely phenomenal. So, yeah, fully supportive.
Thank you. Vice Chair wants to come in.
Chairman, if I may, really, I think. So mine's a pint, Councillor Dixon. Just really, I think for the record, I noted that some of the concerns of the parish council were to do with the possible use of this site as being some residential use as opposed to purely tourism use. I think if the parish council do have concerns on that they really need to take those up with licensing, as that's a licensing matter more than a planning matter. But I think the planning considerations have been given a good airing here.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other comments, questions, members? No, we'll go straight to the vote. It's been proposed by...
Proposed by Councillor Pittman. I think Councillor Evans indicated.
Councillor Pittman and then Councillor Evans, yes. All those in favour, please indicate. Thank you. That's unanimous.
Chairman.
Matthew.
Afternoon to, or morning to members of the Planning Committee. I've got a bit of a croaky voice, so I apologise in advance if I start coughing as well at the same time. So this is an application to vary previous reserve matters approval on what's now known as Beaumont Green. So it's the countryside properties development on the eastern end of Wharton. So the application seeks to remove one of the conditions on the application that relates to a waterfall survey along a watercourse that straddles this eastern boundary, and then to vary various other conditions attached to that approval as a result of changes to house types. So the crux of the application is two changes. The substitution of house types on 85 of the plots within the development, and an increase in the number of dwellings from 345 to 350. So in terms of the background to this, just a brief history. The original outline planning permission was allowed at appeal in 2017 for up to 350 dwellings. That outline permission was then varied by a Section 73 application, again allowed at appeal in 2019. Reserve Matters approval was then granted pursuant to the second outline permission in 2021 for residential development of 345 dwellings with associated infrastructure. So the importance of the Reserve Matters and the outline is the planning permission, so that sets the maximum amount of development that can be granted on the site pursuant to the Reserve Matters. So despite the Reserve Matters involving 5 fewer dwellings, the outline permission for up to 350 is unaffected by that. So since the granting of that original Reserve Matters approval, there's been 6 non-material amendments to that approval and 7 applications to discharge conditions associated with that. So they also need to be captured as part of this new application in terms of the wording of the conditions. So the first and second phases of the development granted by the original Reserve Matters, around 250 dwellings have now been completed on site, and we've got this application to vary that approval to introduce a different developer's house types on the site. Essentially, Countryside Properties have now got a combined partnership agreement with Bovis Homes and Linden Homes, which now operates under the umbrella of the Vistry partnership. So the site is allocated in our local plan, anticipated to deliver 350 dwellings within the plan period. The areas in green and blue are now substantially completed, so they're all Countryside Properties house types. It's the area outlined in red here that is the subject of this application, and then the other areas in orange, they're still Countryside house types. So the changes are limited to this area of phase 3. So there's 85 units within this boundary. So in terms of what was approved, the original Reserve Matters, 345 dwellings, 2.2 hectares of open space, attenuation ponds, play area, open space around the fringes and landscaping. There were 2 connections through to Bridges Recreation Ground. This is a pedestrian link through this triangular section, and then a second shared pedestrian cycle link up in this corner. So the mix, predominantly 3 beds, and then a small number of 2 beds and some 4 beds. So a total of 1,059 bed spaces across the development, density just under 33 dwellings per hectare. So this is what's now proposed by this application. I'll drill down into more detail in terms of where the uplift in numbers is happening, but it's effectively the white land here that's affected by these plot substitutions. Everything that's greyed out is as was approved previously. So there's 5 additional dwellings within this area of white land. The mix has changed, so there's more, so this is the mix across the site as a whole, but there's now more 2-bed units, and 21 extra 3-bed units and 20 less 4-bed units. As a result, there's a reduction in the overall number of bed spaces by 9 to 1,050 across the whole site. That's important in terms of contributions, so there's no further contributions needed. Those that are linked to the number of bed spaces unaffected. But the most important part of this is that these house type substitutions and additions are just slotted into the layout that was previously approved. There's no change to the areas of open space. There's no encroachment within any of the landscape buffers or the attenuation ponds that were previously proposed. It is purely a different house types and a greater number of house types within the same developable areas. Got the same connections through to Bridges Recreation Ground as well. A slight uplift in the density. So it's gone from 32.6 to 33. So in terms of how these additional house types incorporated into the layout, I've included two areas here. So the first is within this area. So you can see that these are all detached house types. These are quite wide footprint dwellings on the corners. They've been flipped through 90 degrees with a smaller, narrower house type, and all the detached house types alongside them have been replaced by pairs of semis. So that's basically, in essence, what has happened. We've got a larger number of smaller house types that have less land take, and that's allowed them to replace the larger detached house types in the same areas. So you've just got an uplift in dwelling numbers achieved by introducing a series of smaller house types. Similarly, in this row, the orientation of that plot has now been flipped through 90 degrees, and you've got a pair of semis here, whereas previously you had a detached. So there's two extra in here, one extra in there, and then the final area of the site that's affected in that triangular section at the top is these two pairs of semis. So these have been introduced in place of those detached house types. The other house types have also changed from countryside to Bovis homes, and there are some narrower versions in there to create that space that's allowed the semis to be introduced in place. So there's an uplift of 2 in that area. So that's where the 5 extra dwellings come from. In terms of the appearance, this is that same triangular area of the site. So this is what was approved previously, and then the equivalent street scene for that same area of the site with the revised house types. They are very similar materials, same basic kind of design principles, facing gables, projecting canopies and porches, garages behind driveways, boundary walls on corners. This is a dual aspect dwelling, so that's the front of this house here and the side of that property there. So it follows the same design principles as the previous approval. They're all 2 stories. There's some with dormers in the roofs, but all the dwellings are 2 stories in scale. And it follows the same design principles as the previous approval. Excuse me. In terms of the Parish Council's objection, this appears to relate to this informal cut-through that's been formed here. So basically that hedge has been trampled down because there's a pedestrian desire line when you come through the end of this cul-de-sac to just walk through onto the recreation ground rather than to walk around to the formalised link here. So this was something mentioned in the Parish Council's response. The applicant suggested 2 options to rectify it. The first was to create a formal link through to their land, so an additional link within this area. And then the second was to create a barrier, effectively put up a fence along here and then replant the hedge to deter access and direct people towards this formal link here. The Parish Council haven't responded to either of those suggestions, so there's several responses and chases sent to them in November, December and January. So to basically create a resolution to this issue, the developer has chosen option 2 to create this barrier here. So that's this dashed orange line, which is a 0.6 metre high knee rail. So previously that finished here, so it's now been extended across there, and that hedgerow is to be replanted. So just in terms of summarising the main issues, outline permission establishes the principle of development that allows up to 350 dwellings, That's what's known in the legislation or the planning practice guidance as the operative part of the permission, the description of development that sets the maximum number of dwellings that can be constructed under that planning permission. So although the reserve matters refers to 345, the maximum that's allowed at the outline is unaffected by that reserve matters. The reserve matters is a condition to the outline planning permission. So there's no change to the operative part of the permission as a result of this application to increase the number. So the site's allocated for housing in the local plan. It's within the settlement and it's anticipated to deliver 350 dwellings within the local plan period. So the 5-unit uplift ensures that that's achieved, delivers benefits to our housing land supply and makes a more efficient use of land without creating an overly intensive density. As I mentioned, there's no change to the developable area. It's just changing the house type, smaller house types within the same development boundary. Following the principles that were established by the extant reserve matters. In terms of the spacing distances, because it's just placing plots within, new houses within the same plots, it's the same basic spacing distances between dwellings within the site. So there's no change to the interfaces there, and there's no change to the garden areas. With respect to highways, there's no objections from the Highway Authority, so the impact of 350 dwellings on the site was established by the transport evidence submitted and allowed as part of the outline permission. The parking provision for each of the houses meets the standards in the SPDs, at least 2 parking spaces per dwelling, and the larger house types have garages. Because there's a reduced overall number of bed spaces within the development, there's no need for any additional financial contributions. The reserve matters originally, even though it was 345 units, it included 105 units of affordable housing, so that was slightly over 30%. But the result of that is that the 105 units are exactly 30% of 350 now, so that slight over provision in the previous reserve matters means that no additional affordable housing contributions needed from the 5-dwelling uplift. And the removal of condition 18, that was a condition that required an additional water vole survey to be carried out before that watercourse was diverted on the eastern boundary. If those works didn't take place by the 20th of July 2021. So the developers confirmed that the watercourse diversion works happened after that cut-off date, but they've provided us with a copy of the survey that took place in August 2021 prior to those works taking place. So there's no need to retain that time-limited condition, as that survey was carried out prior to the watercourse diversion works. There was a habitat regulations assessment as part of the outline and reserve matters previously. The conclusions of that and the mitigation measures, which were essentially homeowner information packs for recreational disturbance, are unaltered by the changes in this scheme. So the conditions have been updated to reflect the amended plans that are submitted with this application, or the details that have already been approved through previous applications to discharge the planning conditions. So those conditions have been reworded to simply require compliance with the details that have already been approved, or those that have been altered and submitted with this application. So with that in mind, the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Matthew, for that presentation. We have currently one person, Councillor Dixon, that wishes to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to say, this appears to have come to us because of the Parish Council's request. It appears to be someone having a grumble over people walking over a path, which is not in the developers. You know, they've made a complaint about that. They've tried to remedy it on 3 separate occasions. They've not had a response, and they've not come today to talk about their objection to it. I see no issue with this whatsoever. Thank you for the presentation. Absolutely top draw. Any other question that I had has been answered in there already, and I'm happy to recommend this for approval.
Councillor Pittman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can't see what there is to object about this. I do think the change in the house design reflects some of the problems that there were before with the previous houses. And I am pleased that some of these houses are smaller units, reflecting basically what the public want rather than just rather large houses. My objection to the previous housing was the fact that some they overlooked their neighbours. Obviously, this is of a different nature now because it's basically just on the. It's not overlooking the existing caravan parks, etc. So I would be happy to basically recommend approval for this because it is a way forward and the houses are more appropriate. Oh, sorry, I would second. Sorry, Councillor Dixon.
Vice Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, just one comment really. I'm surprised the developer chose the option they chose. If it had been me and there'd been an objection from the parish council, I'd have chose a formal access through because there's obviously a need by residents. So, but that's just a comment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you wonder whether an E-rail, somebody will just walk over the top of it. Yeah.
Knee-rails are obviously cheaper than tarmac in the
I suppose really dealing with this particular issue, you know, cutting through, I think efforts were made to put options forward to the parish council for discussion. They weren't responded to, and I think that's disappointing because obviously as a result of that dialogue, it might have been that the opinion you just expressed there might have been one of the opinions put forward at the time and might have factored into that discussion and resolution of a problem because clearly it can be resolved. It's not a huge problem, but it seems to be the reason, if not one of the reasons, why this is now being presented before committee.
Yeah, just to kind of clarify that, the Parish Council's original response referred to a barrier being put up there, a fence being put up there, rather than formalising the link. The developer suggested, well, we could just formalise the link. That does create an added layer of complexity in terms of them being the adjoining landowner, the Parish Council. So the Parish Council needs to agree to the provision of that link. Similarly to this link, so there was a specific planning condition on the reserve matters that required the parish council to agree to that link crossing over onto their land. So that does create an added element of complexity, and it's very difficult to do that when someone isn't coming back to you. So the parish council isn't replying to say, yes, that's okay, they're not engaging with that, so there's no real alternative in that scenario than to go down the other road of creating this barrier.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out as well, because we had a previous discussion about the need for smaller housing, etc. And we've got 68 two-bedroom houses here. Delighted to see that. 214 three-bedroomed houses, and 68 four-bedroom houses as well. And with only in addition to the 3, 4, 5 at 5 houses. So it's a reconfiguration. It's a different mix of house types that Bovis are obviously bringing in, and so therefore there isn't an awful lot to object to, in my view, on this particular application. Are there any other comments or observations or questions? We have had it moved by Councillor Dixon and seconded by Councillor Pittman. So if there are no more comments, we can go straight to the vote. All those in favour, please indicate.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
All right, thank you, members. We now go to item 5. Thank you very much, Matthew, for that presentation. And that's page 149. Land at Larkhill Farm, Garstang Road, Little Eccleston. And I think... Okay.
You now have a turn.
Land at Larkhill Farm. I'm going to hand over to Beth. Thank you very much.
Oh, good afternoon. So the application here is for land next to Larkhill Farm. It's shown within the red circle. It's the settlement of Great Eccleston is located just to the east here, and the site can be accessed from Garstang Road. It's also positioned within an area of designated countryside. So the scheme is for a permission in principle, and that's for the construction of up to 9 dwellings. Permission in principle applications require no further information rather than just access, location, land use and amount of development. So we don't kind of look at sort of more detailed matters at this point. The parish council have objected to the application due to concerns over the availability of the area to support further development, and we should have some comments from Councillor Hayhurst as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Beth. It's actually from the ward councillor for the area, is Councillor Hayhurst. He sends his apologies. He would have liked to have been here today, but he sent this representation through to the planning team last night. And he says, the agenda states that in the circumstances, approval must be granted unless there is a special reason for rejecting it. Can I please advise the committee that I'm against the application and that I believe that we do have special reasons for rejecting the application, as with the developments that have been approved in Great Eccleston, it will effectively merge the two villages.
Thank you for that, Catherine. And Catherine's obviously, as she says, read that out on behalf of Councillor Hayhurst, who wanted to make those comments but couldn't be here. Back to you, Beth.
Thank you. So this is the application site. So it's the red edge here, triangular piece of land. It's surrounded by open countryside. The nearest neighbour is the farmhouse here, and then also there's some more neighbours here down here. There's some street view pictures of the site. So as you can see, this is Garstang Road. It's fairly straight access. The access would be from this farm gate here, so there's an existing access there already, and that would sort of mean that highways wouldn't really raise any objections or concerns at this point for residential development. So here are some site photos just taken from Garstang Road. So the development site would sort of sit within this area and sort of along this boundary here. So there's an existing farm building, but that does not form part of the site. That's outside the red edge. So I think it's important to note that next door to the site, Wyre Council have supported and approved quite a large residential development for up to 350 dwellings. This is the application site here, just for context, and this is the site that's been approved by Wyre. It does also form part of within their local plan of development, so it seems to be fairly large. And again, this just is an aerial picture to show that the site at Wyatt is also being started. So development is now being undertaken. And again, this is the development site. So when it's finished, it will pretty much run up to this boundary here, with commercial development up to that point. And again, from my site visit, the dwellings are also starting to come up next door, so they can be seen within the street scene, which means that this development will sort of sit within this cluster. So, in summary, the permission in principle application is a fairly recent legislation which allows permission based on land use, location and amount, with a decision being based against planning policy. The site is located in the countryside where policy GD4 applies and is restrictive of new development. So the proposal is in conflict with the development plan, as it does not satisfy any element of GD4, such as minor infill. However, the housing land supply position of the council is a material consideration to inform decision alongside policy. The council at this time is unable to show a 5-year housing supply, with the latest figures showing a housing supply of 4.35 years. This means that the tilted balance applies and requires schemes for housing to be supported unless significant and demonstrable harm arises from the development. So in this instance, the principle would be acceptable, given that the accessible and sustainable location of the development, such as the distance from Great Eccleston, and also with the addition of nearby bus stops along Garstang Road, improving public transport links. The site is alongside the mixed-use development that has been approved by Wyre Council, which means that there would be no visual harm with the development, given the site's position directly to the west of the larger scheme, and it is concluded, therefore, that the land use and location would be acceptable in this instance. In terms of the additional considerations which we need to be dealt with, the scheme proposes up to 9 dwellings, which would achieve the council's target density, although this does seem ambitious for the site, given the constraints from the shape and limited frontage width. But again, these things will be dealt with later down the line. Access is not part of the consideration at this time, but given its location and positioning close to Garstang Road, there would be adequate capacity to create an acceptable access point for the scheme, and the highways team haven't sort of raised any issues. Neighbours, again, this isn't a consideration at this time, but given the distance between most off-site neighbours, this shouldn't be a concern, and appropriate layouts would need to be formed in order to mitigate any issues with the occupants of the existing farmhouse at Lark Hill Farm. So, in terms of the next stages, the following approval for permission in principle, a technical detailed consent application would be made, which would deal with these other issues, such as the layout, access, neighbour impacts, landscaping, ecology, etc. And this is similar to a reserved matters application when dealing with an outline permission. So, in summary, we would therefore ask that the application is granted permission in principle at this time. So, any questions?
Thank you, Beth, for that presentation. So, we've heard the presentation, you've had information in the report, so we now go to questions and debate. Councillor Evans.
Thank you very much. I can't see any problem with this development. I understand it goes against the local plan, but at the same time there's such a large development right alongside it that it's literally just an appendix at the side of it, realistically. I do agree with the point that you've raised there, that it's a funny sort of triangular shaped piece of land, and I'm not quite sure how I would get 9 dwellings onto that, but that's for discussions at a later stage. But as far as I can see, there's no objections in terms of accessibility to the road, so I'm happy to support it in principle.
I suppose I should point out it is up to 9 dwellings, not necessarily 9 dwellings. Thank you. Ask if there are some other questions and comments. Councillor Settle.
It's not a question really, Chairman. It's just going back to Councillor Hayes' comment about Little Eccleston and Great Eccleston in effect bumping into each other. Can you just show that diagram again? Because the 350 houses do that, don't they? Where is the boundary between Great and Little?
I'm glad you asked that question.
I don't know.
If we go back to the bottom.
To the bottom?
The end of the slides.
Oh, to end.
So the red line on those slides, that hopefully you can see, is the borough boundary. So if I can just squeeze across and get the mouse, Beth. So the actual application site, so that part of the application site is the borough boundary. So filed, Wyre. So Wyre have granted planning permission for their development largely to the edge of Wyre, and this goes exactly to the edge of Fylde. So that's why the shape of the sites are the shape of the site, because it's just a historical arrangement from whenever the two boroughs were divided up.
I think I agree with Councillor Evans that the 250 houses dwarfs it and they bump up into each other anyway. So this triangular part is lost in the noise.
So just take that further, sorry. So pretty much everything on Little Eccleston is to the north of, because the borough boundary comes up there, snakes through here, and these bits are in Wyre, all this is in Fylde. So I can understand Councillor Hayhurst's point, but you've got all the development on this side of the road here, which is opposite the development at this side of the road. So the road remains a barrier between Great Eccleston and Little Eccleston, and effectively these properties will be an annex to Great Eccleston. And let's face it, we're going to be part of the same borough in no time. I thought that would be the least controversial statement I'd make today.
I'll just qualify what Andrew said there, possibly.
Well, yeah, just looking at that, I'm happy to second approval.
Right, thank you. Are there others that want to contribute to this? I just wanted to say that when I read this and I realised there's a conflict with sort of policy, etc. But then, you know, demonstrable harm, etc. I think has already been created by a 250 housing estate, you know, 350, sorry, housing estate, and that ship has sailed, I'm afraid, you know, in terms of that. Vice Chair.
Just very briefly and semi-seriously. Oh, no, thank you. I do sympathise with Councillor Hayhurst's point. He's completely right about wanting to maintain the identity of rural settlements. But as the chairman said, to a large extent that ship sailed. Little Eccleston looks as though it's now larger than Great Eccleston, or soon will be. Perhaps the solution to that would be to change the names and call them Eccleston Magna and Eccleston Parva or something like that. But that's moving away from the subject. But
okay. It was just about worth keeping the microphone on there, I think.
It was just about.
So we've had Councillor Evans proposing and Councillor Settle, I think, seconding that. Are there any other comments? Can we go to the vote? Right, to the vote. All those in favour, please indicate. Okay, thank you. All those against? Any abstentions? One abstention, thank you. So that one has been approved. Yes. What we'd like to do now is go to the index of appeal decisions, because that's a paper attached to the agenda on page 160, right back at the report. Could I thank Beth for her... oh, she's still here. There we are. You're hanging on a bit. Thank you, members of the public that came as well, as we discuss these particular appeal decisions. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to, obviously we put reports on each agenda where we've had appeal decisions. I wanted to bring one to your attention because I know it's one that the committee took a lot of sort of interest in. We had an application for some residential properties opposite the Miller Arms in Singleton. It was deferred for a site visit, and then it was refused by committee contrary to officer recommendation following that site visit about 12-18 months or so ago. There was then a second application, which was, that application was for 4 dwellings. There was a second application for 5 dwellings. If I go back to this is an aerial image of Singleton Village, Miller Arms, so it was this area of land opposite. The scheme was for 4, and there was a second application which was for 5, which officers refused under delegated powers, taking the steer from the position that committee had taken. So both of those applications were refused. Both have gone to appeal, and in both cases the appeals have been allowed and planning permission granted. So rather than just leave that on the agenda papers, I thought it would be useful. These are the houses that were there. The inspector looks at read the inspector's letters, it goes through the issues, recognises the conservation area, because I think that was the key consideration to committee. The inspector, she takes notice of the cottages around there. The properties at that end of the village are the sort of historic cottages that so I suppose set the character of the conservation area. The inspector then talks about larger buildings in the area, refers to the pub as a larger building, refers to a farm building, which I assume will be these farm buildings here, and then refers to more recent development here, and takes a position that there is a different context around this area to what there is around this area, where the historic part of the village is. You've got the firehouse here. You've obviously got the historic bit of the village that snakes up towards the school and beyond. So on that basis, she comes to the conclusion that not appear to be of an inappropriate scale or massing, and would maintain the prevailing residential character and linear form of development within the conservation area. Refers to the prominence, refers to the side gable wall, so I think that was a particular concern of members, if we recall back, that we had that, it's not that view, it's the other way around, but it's that depth of the property was a particular feature that members put into the reason for refusal. But so she's referred to that, but concludes that that's a reasonably interesting side elevation, and that there will be landscaping, and therefore, whilst it is a prominent view, it's not altering her findings. She goes through some of the other points that were raised about development in the village and not in the spirit of the trust and all that, but concludes that doesn't change her position. So she grants planning permission and accepts the conditions that we suggested, which include withdrawing PD rights and retaining control over materials and things like that. But obviously the principle of the development is one that she's gone with. We obviously she's gone through the points that we put a written statement together, informed by used Toby, the planning consultant, to do it, who put a written statement together informed by the proposer and seconder. It was actually shared with Councillor Lee as well, as he spoke quite persuasively against the development when it was here. She has taken into account points that were raised in that, and has just, as I explained, just reached a different view to the one that we reached as a council. And so that's where we are on that one, I'm afraid. So that planning permission has been granted. The only other appeal we've had was relating, it was one of your cases, wasn't it? Yeah, relating to a garage. So for those who are familiar with Ray Green, that's coming out of Ray Green towards Wharton, towards Burley Arms. They wanted to put a 14 metre by 7 metre garage in the location where that newer timber fence is, and we felt that was inappropriately prominent at the edge of a rural village. And the applicant said, well, it's no different to the Burley Arms, about 2 miles away, and the inspector disagreed with that view and has dismissed that appeal. But that's a bit of a flavour for the appeals that we've had in the last month or so.
Thank you, members. Councillor Collins had asked for a discussion at the end regarding consistency. Well, I was going to say anyway, I've been advised that, you know, we really ought to stick to the agenda that we have here, and that was not on the agenda. It's an applications meeting, and so we wouldn't have done anyway. But the other point I was going to make is we've had 3.5 hours of a long debate and some difficult applications to look at. So thank you for your time and patience. And
We really had 3.5
thank you very
hours,
much.